Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on September 16th, 2022. Thank you all for joining us remotely via WebEx events. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We will conduct a closed session this morning to discuss two topics. First, Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update, and second, ratification of union contracts. We will conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We will begin public session at approximately 10 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Moody, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
We do. I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 8:32 a.m. to discuss two topics. The first, Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update, and the second, ratification of union contracts. With respect to the Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves matters that are confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product doctrine, and involve the discussion of security for district property and utility infrastructure information, including but not limited to Nebraska City Station 2. With respect to the ratification of union contracts, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves a negotiation of collective bargaining agreements and involves matters that are confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product doctrine. Do I have a second?
Second.
Wagner,
Yes.
Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Director Howard is running a few minutes late. Director Molhoff,
Yes.
Moody,
Yes.
Spurgeon,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Yoder.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding two topics, Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update and the ratification of union contracts. No votes or other actions will be taken. So at this time, public attendees will be removed from the WebEx event and we'll stop the WebEx event recording. All right, I have 10 a.m., so we will get going here. Earlier before the closed session, there may be an announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. Members of the public, thank you for attending.
We need to, did we already do the motion to reopen?
Oh, thank you, Mo. I totally missed that on my sheet.
I thought maybe I missed an entire roll call vote. That's okay. We'll do it over.
Thank you. Restarting. Okay. A motion and second is required to reconvene in open session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Wagner,
Yes, please.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Molhoff,
Yes.
Moody,
Yes.
Spurgeon,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Yoder.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, the motion to come out of closed session at 10:01 a.m. is carried. This closed session was limited to discussion regarding two topics, the Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update and ratification of union contracts. No votes or other board actions were taken during the closed session. All right, now, earlier before the closed session, I made the announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. Members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Per the board's guidelines for public participation, we do not take public comment during the all committees meeting. We will take public comments at the board meeting on Thursday, September 22nd, which will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center, and it begins at 5 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx events by going to oppd.com. Okay, joining me today via WebEx are my fellow board members, Mike Kavanaugh, Sarah Howard, Janice Molhoff, Craig Moody, Mary Spurgeon, Eric Williams, and Rick Yoder. We also have President and CEO Javier Fernandez, our General Counsel Steve Bruckner with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, members of our executive leadership team, and OPPD staff. Currently, we have about 10 attendees in the meeting consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. We conduct a closed session earlier today to discuss two topics: Enterprise Risk Management Quarterly Update and the ratification of union contracts. Today we will hear the following committee reports. Director Moody will provide the governance report. Director Yoder will provide the finance report. Director Williams will provide the systems management and nuclear oversight report, and Director Molhoff will provide the public information report. Javier Fernandez will now give the safety briefing.
Thank you, Director Bogner. For the safety briefing, since we're in a virtual environment, of course, physical safety is always important, very important for all of us to take a few seconds as I'm giving this update, and please look around your area on the floor, behind the desk. Do you have any tripping hazards that could get in the way if you had to exit the facility in an emergency situation? That's really, really important. Of course, if you have an AED or at the very least first aid kit at home, I encourage you to remember where it is. At a break, go check, make sure that you have it well stocked if you ever need to do that. If you're feeling ill, please continue to stay home and not spread the germs. If you're not feeling well during the call, this is important. For those of us who are participating remotely, if you don't have anyone at home, make sure that someone on the call has a way to assist you, whether that be a phone number of a loved one or an address where you are located in. If we ever have to call 911, hope that's not the case, but if that is the case, it would be impossible for us to let them know where you are. So, respecting privacy here, I want to make sure that everybody on the call knows that someone on the call has a way to assist you if you are experiencing a medical emergency. Active shooter is important. It's something that we continue to live with on a daily basis. Run, hide, or fight continues to be our method of reaction here. We usually, if you're at an OPPD facility, you will hear code 32, and that means we have an active shooter in the building. We need to run, hide, or fight. On the psychological safety piece, I would like to focus on trust. Trust is something that is built through time. Some people say trust is earned, and it takes time to do that. And I encourage all of us to have a healthy dialogue, always trying to build on that trust. It doesn't matter whether people have different opinions, different perspectives. Trust that they have good intentions, and vice versa. You should expect the same trust back to you. I think this contributes to a culture of psychological safety that is so important on the work we do. Next slide, please. September is National Preparedness Month. Great time to learn and prepare for any emergency situation. This is the time when you get to run drills. This is the time when you get to check fire extinguishers at home. Make sure that all of the batteries in your fire detectors and smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors at home are working properly. September, again, National Preparedness Month. September also is Mental Health Awareness Month, which is mental health is an integral component of maintaining good overall health. It's not just our physical health, but mental health super important and oftentimes stigmatized to the point where people don't necessarily raise their hand and seek help if you are feeling if you're not feeling 100% from a mental perspective. The heat is still here. We're still doing a lot of work outside, and overexertion risk continues to be part of our focus at OPPD. Make sure that we are preparing for the weather. Know that if you have to hydrate, if you have to make sure that you get appropriate rest, and make sure that we avoid that overexertion risk that happens, especially in the active months in the summer and the fall that we're going in. That concludes my safety briefing.
All right, thank you. We will get going here with the Governance Committee. Director Moody.
Thank you, Chair Bogner. Good morning, colleagues. The Governance Committee met on September 14th. You can see the agenda for our meeting in front of you. We will talk about items 1, 2, and 4 momentarily. So I want to take a moment to give you all an update on the board governance workshop. As a reminder, zoom way out, we typically hold a board governance workshop sometime in October of every year. That's preceded by a couple surveys that both the board and executive leadership team take to examine how we're performing as it relates to our current governance structure. And so we started to discuss the plans for doing so this year about a month or so ago, brought it to the Governance Committee back in August, and there was a resounding desire to hold a governance workshop at some point when we could. And so we brought that back, gave you all an update a month ago. We've since had additional conversations really trying to suss out whether or not we can pull it off this year, especially given the three rate design workshops that we just concluded, which required certainly some time on our part, but certainly on the staff's part to get organized on that. And given that it's mid-September already, we really wanted to make sure that we were taking the right approach with respect to not if, but when the governance workshop would be held. We discussed 3 options. Again, just wanting to make sure that we were thinking critically about our time and the use of the staff's time. Those options were to hold it in October if possible, or it was likely to be in November of this year, option 1. Option 2 was to push it back a year and hold it roughly the same time, October of 2023. Option 3 was to shift things a little bit and hold it in the second quarter of 2023, which is what our recommendation is. At this point, the thought is that it's going to be really, really difficult for us to pull it off yet this year. And I think we were reluctant to let anything slide into December. December gets crazy for everybody. So the ability for us to get all of this done, get sufficiently prepared, and do it this year became a pretty significant challenge. We also acknowledge that by pushing it back a year, every time we do this, we're going to run into some of the same sort of electoral challenges, for lack of a better term, which is to say, holding a workshop towards the end of election season in anticipation of board members rolling off and new ones about to come in, felt like something that was inescapable every 2 years. And so that's why we decided to kind of shift a little bit and are zeroing in on a second quarter of 2023 workshop. So we know that for certain, one board member won't be with us. Mr. Yoder his term will end this year, and then another board seat is open. So there may be 2 of us that won't be present at that workshop in the second quarter. So in lieu of that, we're going to conduct, for lack of a better term, an exit interview with those individuals. And we still need to figure out kind of details on that. I did, by the way, after we kind of kicked around these ideas, I did connect with Eric Douglas, who facilitates these workshops every year, just to kind of make sure, honestly, it was a sniff test, just to kind of make sure we weren't thinking about something that was awry. And he asked a couple good questions, but affirmed that the approach is sound. And so I anticipate at least giving him another phone call to see what his role might be when it comes to exit interviews for outgoing board members, so as to inform the workshop that would happen sometime in the second quarter. Naturally, those workshops are always about gaining an affirmation and understanding for what our governance framework is, and then working on issues and really starting to, based on the survey results, get into the opportunities we have for improvement and refinement, and talking, just about some bigger issues that we sometimes don't get the opportunity to do in this format. So that is the plan. To review and to reiterate, nothing this year from a governance workshop standpoint. We're going to push it to next year, and then I will work with Mr. Foch here soon to make sure that we get an exit interview or two done so as to inform that workshop in April. Committee members, did I miss anything critical? Non-governance committee members, any questions that you have? Okay, sounds good. That concludes the chair report. Let's go on to the next agenda item. We are here. The board's role and responsibility is to ratify the tentative agreements that have been reached between our three labor unions and the district. And just a couple points before I turn it over to Mikkel and then Jerry. We have over 1,000 employees that are represented by these three unions, and so we're extremely proud of the work that they do, and are very excited that we've reached a tentative agreement. They have been ratified by the members, and they are planned to be effective retroactively to June 1st. The current agreements expired at the end of May. So our job as board members is, as we've discussed, and we did have a more detailed conversation for the public in closed session to really kind of ask some specific questions. But as a reminder, our job as board members is not to negotiate these things necessarily, but our job is to ratify them. And so that's what's being brought before us today. So from there, I'll turn it over to you, Mikkel, or if you want to go right to Jerry, that's fine too.
That's correct. Thank you so much for giving that beautiful introduction. I think you said exactly what I was about to say. So with that, Jerry, please share the highlights of the negotiations.
Thanks, Mikkel. So a little historical background quickly is for the last 10, 15 years, we've worked on contracts that modernized our benefits package, our health insurance cost for our active employees. And in the course of those negotiations, we've ended up with agreements that for this particular negotiation, there was not a lot around benefits. There was more around comparabilities and things like that. So the previous 15 years has set us up for this particular negotiation. In this negotiation, we were looking to add flexibility, agility, and get some emergency language type in our negotiation process. So that's just kind of the historical background of where we've been and where we were in this negotiation. We have agreed to 3-year contracts with all three unions that are represented at OPPD. Next slide, if you will. So before we actually went into negotiations, we had a lot of conversations with managers, employees, and we set our goals for the 2022 negotiations. And they were really in 3 major buckets. One was the work role changes, and that was the flexibility, the agility that I was talking about. We also were looking to increase our response and reporting time through this negotiation with avenues that we could work employees, reduce our number of grievances. And then the pandemic brought on some remote working challenges and some work from home challenges that we knew contractually we had to enter and get some agreement, especially with Local 1483, who had quite a few employees working from home. We also wanted to revamp our vacation leave. Our vacation leave was a use and an ad, and then you potentially had a year of lost vacation. We wanted to move to more of an accrual process, which is what we've seen more companies move to. And we wanted to make sure that we modernize that in comparability to other companies. And then, of course, the last piece was wages and benefits, and that was negotiate wages and benefits. Even though benefits were small in it, the wage piece was to make sure that we maintained our attractiveness in the market and in comparability with other utilities. So next slide, if you will. We used the approach of a two-tiered approach to create the initial proposal. So we passed proposals back and forth, negotiated with those, and we also on our team, we just didn't have labor relations, but we had members of management that actually sat on that as a cross-functional negotiation team to make sure that as we negotiated these things, emergency language and those things, that it offered and it gave the flexibility to OPPD management the way that we perceived that it would as we negotiated. Next slide. So with the tentative agreement, we did agree to a 3-year agreement with all 3 unions. We did create that emergency language that we sought after, that would offer the flexibility and agility that OPP needed during an emergency. We have revamped our vacation leave. We had a few increases like in health and life insurance, and it was based on our comparabilities. We had some dental increases that I would say was where we were lacking a little bit in comparability to other companies. Our life insurance, we used 1.5 times of salary we seen in the markets where most companies had moved to 2 times, and so we moved that. We streamlined some discipline procedure, even though we don't have a lot of discipline, thankfully, with our employees, but we did streamline it to where we could offer to move quickly through the discipline process. And based on union and based on the company coming together and discussing, we could skip steps in the grievance process and things like that. And then a few other items which always come was breaks and lunches, call out overtime, and the rest of the list that you see there on just some increases. So with that being said, next slide. We believe that what we have done in this negotiations, we've negotiated what our OPPD's stated goals were. We have obtained the greater flexibility with scheduling. We've also established those work from home guidelines that we needed based on the pandemic work. We believe that what we've negotiated is also will encourage after hours response times, and that will ensure the reliability that we need going forward. We've eliminated or we've created a new vacation that eliminated the risk of employees not using their vacation. From a mental health perspective, we thought it was important to get them to use vacation, and we've eliminated that risk of them not using vacation by having it into an accrual process. And then we believe at the end of the day, we've offered a in comparison competitive wages and benefit increases to make sure that our employees maintain a competitive wage and benefits in comparability to other companies. So I would say your approval at this point is requested to ratify the contracts.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Colleagues, what questions do you have? I'm looking for hands. Feel free to just go ahead and chime in. Director Spurgeon, go ahead.
Well, no questions, but I just wanted to make a note that on the previous slide under tentative agreement, all those other items there, those look tiny, but they are not tiny. to people who need funeral leave, who need clarification about how they can use sick leave for themselves or other family members. I commend you for working with that. I think about the railroad union issues that were highlighted in the news in recent weeks, and you listen to what the employees wanted, and they were so small in the grand scheme of things, but so important to them in their lives. So I commend you for making this turn out better for our employees, so that they have a sense of more control over their personal life while working for an organization that says, we need you when we need you. So good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director, and I will pass that along to the team as well. I'm not to be commended. I had a great team that worked with us on these negotiations, and so I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Spurgeon. Others? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate the great work on your part and the team's part. We'll have this on our agenda as an action item on Thursday.
Thanks, Director Moody.
Moving on. We are on to our SD10 ethics monitoring report. I'm going to turn this right over to you, Mikkel. Go right ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again. SD10, we as a company, we've been mandated by this board to have a code of ethics and business conduct. And of course, this is all in the interest of the public trust, and we want the public to have confidence in our integrity, and just that we are doing the right thing, not just internally for our employees, but also, again, for our customer owners. As is shown on this slide at the bottom, among other things, this code it requires us to have high ethical standards in all aspects of official conduct, to establish clear guidelines for those ethical standards and conduct by setting forth the acts that may be incompatible with the best interests of the district, among the other two. So what we are here to do today is to just share with the board where we landed and what has happened relative to ethics at OPPD over the last 12 months. Next slide, please, Mo. So what is shown here is from a board of directors perspective, what we are looking for, ethics as it relates to loyalty, compliance with applicable laws, and observance of ethical standards. And then, of course, we have a policy 3.01, that governs employee behavior. And there are the things at the bottom there that we are looking for. So just to highlight one thing from the board of directors list as it relates to loyalty, no director shall be or appear to be subject to influences, interests, or relationships that conflict with the best interests of the company. So that again is something that the policy strives or looks for as it relates to board of directors, members of the board. Next slide, please, Mo. So both the board of directors code of conduct and the employee policy, as I mentioned before, set the types of activities that may be incompatible with what is seen or deemed as being in the best interest of OPPD and the public. As it relates to what we have observed in the reports that we have made, Mo, would you go to the next slide, please? On page 5, we show here our findings. So from a board of directors perspective, we had one external allegation, and for those of you who were in our governance committee meeting and in the pre-committee meeting, you know that we had none here. And so the process, even as is shown here, continued to work the way it was supposed to work. So we had identified none. We have updated that to reflect the one that we discussed previously. And we have put a process in place relatively quickly to make sure that we get updates as it relates to any activity happening on the side of the board of directors. From an employee perspective, we had 17 activities reported for the previous 12 months. 16 were investigated and appropriate action taken, and there is still one pending investigation. As an example, so that makes up the 17, we saw allegations related to discrimination, improper management practices, nepotism, retaliation, theft, those types of things. So again, there was an investigation held in each of these cases. We only have one pending. With that, I'm going to turn this over to or invite Jerry Rainey back to the floor to answer any questions that the board may have, but ultimately it is our request that the board approve the monitoring report for SD10. Any questions from the board?
Not seeing any hands, Mikkel. Okay, colleagues, seeing none, then this question remains. This is our common process for strategic directives after we affirm, or at least we discuss the affirmation of compliance. We want to have a discussion about any additional reflections on what's been accomplished or challenges or gaps. So opening the floor for conversation now. Director Spurgeon, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Director Moody. In the past month, our CEO was interviewed by I believe it's the business ethics organization that's found on the Creighton University campus, which I understand OPPD was instrumental in starting, was one of the founding organizations. And it just delighted me to read that interview as CEO Fernandez discussed the importance of testing out how one's ethics will be applied in situations that one may face once in a lifetime or hopefully never. And I really appreciate the emphasis that OPPD has on this by having this strategic directive and the way in which it very publicly engages and supports other businesses and similar institutions in really stepping out on this and working on it. One might think, listening to the news media, that it's not important to be ethical or truthful or to work with goodwill. And I think that's what makes it possible for OPPD to do the good job that it does. So just wanted to call that out. Much appreciate the attention given to this by your department, Mikkel, and by all the employees who keep this in mind when they come to work every day. Thank you.
Great call out, great comments, Director Spurgeon. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any other comments or questions or comments about accomplishments or challenges or gaps? Okay, hearing none, I think we've still got a rock solid SD 10, good monitor report, and this will be again on the agenda for approval on Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is our board meeting schedule for 2023. Before I turn over to you, really quick, Scott, I don't want to steal any thunder here, but the desire here is there became a need that was clear to get a sense for what our board meeting agenda, or excuse me, our board meeting schedule was going to be for 2023 for planning purposes. And Scott said, why don't we just get that approved now rather than waiting until the end of 2022? And we said, that sounds great. So what you have in front of you is the current schedule of board meetings there you go, let's pull it up. Thank you, Mo. 2023. It follows all of the same protocols that we use for how we schedule these as in years past, so shouldn't be any surprises for anyone here. A couple things to note. The asterisks, date, time, and location are subject to change, of course. As you see, the locations for Tuesday meetings are, at least for now, WebEx. We are working towards a solution where we can come together in person. I'll just offer my 2 cents on that. I'm anxious to be together for these meetings, but we want to make sure that we retain the ability for the public to attend virtually. That's really important to the committee, and so we want to make sure that we retain that ability. So we've got to work through and make sure that we can succeed in both capacities there. So that likely will change from a location standpoint. And then also you see 2 asterisks next to June or July. Those are the potential cancellations. We will work towards that. As in the years past, we've not had board meetings in July. I think that's generally kind of the intent here as well, but we wanted to allow for some flexibility for that to occur either in June or July, not in both June or July. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Again, just want to kind of lock this in, and if anything arises, we can certainly adjust course if needed, but for planning purposes, wanted to have a schedule. Any questions? Director Kavanaugh, I see a hand. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. As far as the board meetings, the Thursday board meetings, why do we still have the need to have these at 5 o'clock? It seems to be it's a rather inconvenient time. It's middle of rush hour. It extends our management staff's workday significantly. I would prefer to see us revert back to what we did for many years and schedule those at 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursdays.
Well, I can't answer I believe it's a scheduling issue with respect to the Omaha Douglas Civic Center. Historically, since I've been on the board, our Thursday meetings have been at 4. So I don't recall having Thursday meetings at 10, but if someone has knowledge as to room availability for the Civic Center, please chime in.
If I could add a couple. One, the room availability for Douglas Civic Center prompted the move from 4 to 5. So part of it was accommodating that. The second is board did have discussion around a morning versus evening meeting in light of it wanting to be a public session and make it as available to as many people in the public to attend as possible. At the time, the board had landed on the notion of an evening time working better than a morning time was the historical conversation that I recall on that topic.
I don't think we've seen any impact at all as far as public participation, no matter what time we have the meetings. And as far as the need to continue to have them at the Douglas County Civic Center, I don't know how this is going to go on, but it's like, I don't know. It's time to get back to our own building.
Well, there are limitations with our own building that we need to resolve, so we're not gonna solve those today, and that's why we're continuing to hold them there. And to echo Scott's point with respect to the time, I do recall, boy, it's been a few years, and it's pre-pandemic, as I recall, when we did a little work, we did a survey to try and understand when the preferred time for the public to attend, and that's why we landed kind of in that late afternoon, early evening time frame.
Dr. Moody, you are correct on that. We went to our power panel as well as did outreach on that. even to talk about was that the right day and so forth. But with that being said, that was pre-pandemic and before we were doing WebExes. So people wanted to have it on their way home from the office, or if there was something on the agenda, at least they could leave the office a little bit early, but not get into their family time later on.
Right. It kind of hopefully threads that needle, at least in some way, for some folks if they need to. And again, acknowledging that I don't think it's wise for us to measure the extent to which the public has interest based on the number of people in the room, because most people attend virtually, and we want to continue to afford that opportunity for people. And I think the data has proven out that the times are about right. Other comments or questions, colleagues? Okay, looking for hands, don't see any. Okay, again, we'll be on the agenda on Thursday for our approval of the 2023 board meeting schedule. Chair Bogner, that concludes governance. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move now to the Finance Committee report. Director Yoder.
Thank you, Director Bogner. Let me know, I'm having some bandwidth issues. Let me know if I get garbled and I'll stop the video. So we'll talk about items 2, 3, and 4. The overview of the budget process. So we'll be getting the annual budget, the COP, coming up here shortly. Discussion. I put it on the agenda, and we had discussion a little bit about how board members are looking for an increased line of sight beyond that annual budget, and how finance and also how finance and planning. How finance planning and resource planning are intertwined. So we will be seeing, it's just some communication between the board and board members and Mr. Bishop's team about expectations. And I know we're going to be seeing that addressed in the coming months. So it was just a little bit of conversation there. Also on number 3, there was a little bit of conversation and update for the board members, confirming the path forward for the rate design project. That provided, so that's been public information. This is a confirmation of that. And it provided a segue to item number 4, which is the SD2 rates policy revision. So the rates design project is focused around principles. If, as you recall, in our 3 sessions, there was a Venn diagram that talked about how the rates design project is focused on principles. The SD2 rates policy revision has been focused more on that opening language of SD2. The existing language has a clear goal and metrics set out. And that's been discussion about the opportunities for improvement for that language for many months now. With that in mind, that discussion and some subsequent phone calls with board members on the committee confirms that it's time to overcome what I refer to as that sunk cost bias and shift our course just a little bit. Again, our work in the committee has been focused on the opportunities for improving the existing language, but I don't think that we've have a clear path for resolution there. So there's a new direction that I proposed, and I think I've got concurrence by members of the committee. It sprouts from a little bit different lens. What the board wants to accomplish with as the goal or outcomes for our rates language for that SD2. And there are a couple of components, and so rather than focus on the metric that we have, the path that we will be discussing here will be more on what we want those the goal to be for that SD. And I think clearly we've talked about in the past how SD2 is the only SD that that speaks to affordability, and we do have great metrics there for that. So thanks to the team for doing that, reporting that out. But we need to fine tune that a little bit. And I guess I will just leave it at that. That's where we are. That is where we appear to be headed. And that's a shift. And I thought the other board members needed to know that and have an opportunity to respond to that. So, members of the committee, any comments? And if not, then on out to the other board members. So I'm looking for hands, or you can just jump in, members of the committee.
I'll just jump in. Yeah, well summarized, Director Yoder. One of the things that I've been thinking about since our committee meeting and then our one-on-one discussion that we had is yes, affordability. I think that's what there seems to be a consensus that that's what our desire is. I also acknowledge that our customer owners, while they want to, understand what affordability means with respect to whether it's an energy burden, what they pay per month, et cetera, they still pay attention to rates. And so I don't want to lose that entirely, whether or not that shows up in a monitoring report or what that looks like. But I don't think that we want to sort of gloss over that in the long run. Again, the challenge I think has always been, who should we be comparing our rates to? And the rough measure that we're using, is that really a good measure of rates? I understand all of that. So maybe my only comment here is I don't, as we go forward, I don't want to lose sight of what I still think is an important data point that our customer owners pay very close attention to.
It's a really good note, and I'm not going to do anything but say that's a good note. It'll be part of our discussion in next month, how we can make sure that that's not lost. Thank you. Other members of the committee, I don't see hands from them. And I'm double checking. Okay, not seeing other hands there. So Director Williams, do you have a comment, question?
Yeah, great. Thanks. We did the 3 workshops and you're talking about the SD2 policy update. In the past, we've talked about a biennial rate structure update timeline. So my understanding is that means comments and rate design work would lead to recommendations for rate updates at the end of 2023 to become effective into 2024. Is that the timeline we're expecting for the policy and rate design updates?
So when you
Yes,
say
Director
policy,
Williams.
there you go. Thank you. Go ahead. I was going to refer to you, Mr. Bishop. Go ahead.
Sorry, Director Yoder, I didn't mean to jump in front of you.
That's all
No,
right.
that's the current timeframe that we're working to as it relates to the rate design project, Director Williams.
And then I do have a follow-up technical question there. We've talked about communications and hardware updates related to advanced metering infrastructure, and we've talked a little bit about the timelines for that, but the rate design and SD2 updates, as well as that hardware and software updating, needs to be aligned in order to enable some of the more advanced updates we've talked about in the future. My understanding is we'll hear during the COP discussion about investments we're making to facilitate some of that technical upgrades that will enable future rate updates. Is that also right?
That's correct. As part of the COP, we'll talk about what our major capital investments are and what the time frame is. We had mentioned, or Director Yoder had mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about more of a 5-year plan. So as part of that, we'll mention where we're going from a technology perspective. We've also briefed the board as well on some of the AMI investments that we're making in the future. So those should all align as part of what's already been presented.
If I may, Director Williams, and just to make sure that we have good expectations and clarity here, what you said is absolutely correct. The timelines might be different. So we talked about the 2023, end of 2023, to have a proposal to the board to change some rate structures, et cetera, going into 2024. We will not have advanced meter infrastructure by then, right? There are a lot of work streams in progress. It will take longer than that for us to have AMI, but certainly that the rate design, the conversations that are building up to when we have that technical ability to have two-way communication with customers, it's certainly something that we need to start working on right now. But I just wanted to clarify for the public and for those listening, end of 2023 is not going to be when we have full AMI deployed.
Yep. Apologies if I made it seem like that was my expectation. I guess the reason I was asking is that on that every other year rate structure update timeline, that would mean that we would anticipate something in place in time for something like a 2026 implementation of more advanced rates. Is that kind of the longer view? And I know that we just heard an anticipated 5-year work plan, but as an every other year update opportunity, that means that it's important for us to have kind of long-term vision that if it's not going to be implemented at the beginning of 2024, are we anticipating implementation by the beginning of 2026?
It's hard to tell, and I don't think I have the team right now to talk specifically about AMI, but you're right, it's in the 2026, 2027 timeframe. There are a lot of variables in there. There is significant investment in information technology infrastructure that has to happen even before we talk about the meters. It's all the IT that is what we're working on right now. But you're generally directionally right. It's in that 2026, 2027 timeframe that we're aiming for.
Great, appreciate that. And I also look forward to the discussion during the COP and during the additional discussion about the 5-year projection. Thanks very much for the clarification now.
Thank you for your questions. Any other questions? That ends, not seeing questions, and help me if I don't see them. But not seeing any other question, that ends the Finance Committee report. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's see. Next up, we have Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight Committee report. Director Williams.
Great, thanks very much. As is displayed on the screen, the Systems Committee did meet on September 8th. We discussed a few items. Both SD9 monitoring report and SD7 policy revision are discussion items today, so we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. I did want to highlight 2 other things. The Nuclear Decommissioning Oversight Committee met last week. I was able to attend that. And I always appreciate the information that's shared by the outside experts and hearing updates from both our staff and the contractors who are doing work on site. Short update there, everything sounds like it's going very well. And there were a couple of specific points, comments from the external experts on the DOC committee that they appreciated very specific things that we have developed. So kudos to staff for all of the ongoing successful work, remaining on schedule and on budget. Again, is kind of the bottom line from what I heard in that report. I mentioned that because we've moved to the anticipated quarterly update during the board meetings about the nuclear decommissioning. And so we did have the quarterly DOC report, but now we'll anticipate a quarterly board update in a few months. One additional external point that I would mention related to both our resource planning and environmental stewardship discussions. The OPPD staff participated in the Power Review Board review of the Nebraska Power Association Load and Capability Report presentation. And I was able to listen to that virtually last week. And so I appreciate the work that staff put into submitting the information, which was presented to the PRB, and then also being available to answer questions during the discussion of that view of resource planning work that OPPD staff has done and will continue to do in the future. So I appreciate that, that work, and I wanted to highlight that as an additional part of the comprehensive work that that OPPD staff continues to do in providing information to both other agencies and to the public about our view forward. So with that, as I said, we have a couple action items reflected from the committee meeting that will come up here in a little bit. But before that, we have some additional more technical action items on the agenda. And so if we can move forward to the first item on the action item list here. Thank you. Nebraska City Unit 2. Troy, if you can take us through this item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Williams. And we have 2 items for your approval. One is related to this particular one, an unexpected outage, and the other is based upon normal maintenance. So for this particular one here with the exciters, what we're looking for here for clarity is the ability to negotiate and procure materials and services outside the normal sealed bid process. And this is really due to expedite the return of that particular facility. We do sometimes have unexpected failures. This is an example of one. We have a pretty robust directive to move towards more condition-based asset management, which the organization started to do a few years ago. So we'll continue to see enhancements in that area, but we did have a failure in this particular case. And also, I guess, as additional context, there are financial implications for a prolonged outage, as well as this unit provides a lot of local grid and reliability related support to the system. So it's important for us to move quickly to return it to service. Another bit of context is we actually share the output of this unit with several other utilities, 4 of which are here in the state of Nebraska. So as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we had to take the unit offline due to excessive exciter brush wear. And as we went through the inspection process, it was deemed that we could not just machine those, but we really needed to replace those because of the level of wear that was observed. And so these particular pieces and parts are not readily available in the market. So they're pretty specific to the generator type. There are not necessarily spares easily found. If you do need these parts, usually you have to have them manufactured. So we are working down a couple paths of just the potential for maybe a refurbished pair, as well as what does it look like to replace those for new. That work is still actively going. We have engineers involved with that, talking to several different OEMs, manufacturers of that type of equipment. So trying to understand the extent that's still a work in progress. The district's engineer has certified that the use of the sealed bid process in this particular case, considering the limitations we have, is not in the public best interest. And so again, we are looking to be able to negotiate for the procurement of the labor and the materials associated with the completion of returning this generator back into service. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you may have.
And Troy, maybe before we go into questions really quick, I wanna call out all the engineers at the district, especially our engineers in our generation unit. They have been doing amazing work around the clock, weekends, nights. This has been an all hands on deck project for all of our engineers. They've been modeling, they've been looking at different solutions. So I don't know, a public recognition here to Scott Edom and to all of his team. They've been doing fantastic work. Also, I would like to take an opportunity to remind everyone on the public that we operate very large machines, and that not a single machine, not a single technology that we own and operate is free from any risks. Oftentimes, the concept of dispatchable generation is conflated with perfect generation. And that is not the case. This is a good example of how dispatchable generation also has risks, and that we have to implement really good asset management practices on all of our assets to make sure that we have them available all the time. These type of unplanned outages are unfortunate, and they are a good reminder that that even dispatchable generation that is often thought of as being available all the time, it's not always available all the time. And when things break, it takes time to bring them back on. So kudos to the district, kudos to the engineers and all the people that have been working on repairing these and bringing the unit back online. I really appreciate it.
Javier, thanks for that. I also want to call out our asset management group with Clint Zavadale and the work they're doing, as well as supply chain management, because they've been really heavily involved with this also. So as you said, it's really been an all hands on deck, and the engagement from employees have been spectacular from my perspective.
Great, thanks for that additional information. And I think Scott Edom is available. As we look at this picture on the screen right now, some of us might recognize it, but is it possible for Scott to maybe walk from left to right and describe the different parts of what we see on the image so that we're clear about what we describe as the rings and the other parts of the equipment that we're seeing on screen?
Hey, Director Williams, I can do that. This is Scott Edom, the Director of Engineering Services and Utility Operations. So moving from left to right, on the left-hand side is the generator itself. The red section is the rotor shaft, so that's the part that rotates. There's two sets of collector rings, both inboard and outboard, and they are the gray metallic area from, again, working left to right. The first set there, and then in the center is a cooling fan, and then there's another set on the right-hand side. So.
Great, appreciate that. And like I said, some directors have been on site to see things in person, even when the equipment has been disassembled and available for inspection during repair. But I would guess that a lot of people are completely unfamiliar with what is being shown here. So thank you for the technical description. I don't see any hands or questions now. I guess I just want to be clear that the recommendation or the discussion today leads to a recommendation for an action item on Thursday. And the action item is not for a sealed bid process, but authorize the district to go out for negotiation based on the specifics of the type of equipment that we're seeing. So this is the most rapid response process available and most appropriate for the type of equipment and the type of repair necessary. I just want to be clear about what it is that we're discussing today and what the expected next steps are. We've talked about this process in the past. Can you describe, if we take action on Thursday and approve the negotiation, what would be the additional steps and the additional updates to the board and to the public as that process moves forward? Troy, perhaps you can provide us some clarity on what next steps we would expect for updates in the future.
Yeah, so we can easily bring this back through the director's update, which comes out somewhat frequently, as well as if there's a wish to bring this back in a future setting like this, we can definitely do that. This is something that we're comfortable being transparent on, and we don't necessarily expect the fix itself to be substantial from a financial standpoint. It's the work that goes into the completion of the fix, which is really where most of the weight kind of resides. So, and as far as next steps, the team is actively working, has been for a couple of weeks now, through weekends, as well as during the normal work hours to get the path forward on finding, procuring, setting up plans for shipping, and for the work that will ultimately need to happen to replace the items.
Great, appreciate that. I guess in a potentially similar situation, the ongoing work with Power with Purpose becomes an information update item during the committee meetings. Would we anticipate that after action today, there might be information provided during the board meeting on a monthly basis, kind of just a status update because of the significance of the work and the implications from this type of recommendation and potential negotiation?
I'm not sure.
That's one that I'll work with Chair Bogner. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for me to report back maybe during the president's report when I talk about equipment availability factor. It's something we already have on our board meetings. I can take a little bit more time to report on any progress we see on this unit. So if that is agreeable, maybe I can work with Chair Bogner and put that in.
Yeah, that sounds great. Appreciate that suggestion about the way in which we provide updates here. And Javier, just one final point here. We've talked about different strategic directives, policies, monitoring, and metrics. And to your point, you mentioned the equipment availability factor. I know that during the president's report, you talk about the capacity factor of the equipment and how much it operates each month. The strategic directive 4 about reliability has an annual report that describes equipment availability factor. But I appreciate your additional mention of continuing to provide clarity on on the way in which we review that information, because that's a pretty technical detail, but something that we have discussed internally now about the difference between metrics and how they impact our reliability, and the way in which we need to bring equipment back online or back available rapidly. So appreciate the clarification that's been provided by you and by staff about different metrics that will help us understand the equipment we have. And then one last point there. You mentioned, or a couple people have mentioned, the improved asset management planning and accountability that we have internally on our assets. And so, again, kudos to you, Troy. You have mentioned that both in direct in-person conversations and during past board meetings and other reporting opportunities. And so, the recognition that we needed to improve our asset management planning and the way in which that is now being reflected in understanding this equipment is a great step forward. So thank you to you and your team for recognizing that and having that information available and sharing that with the board and with the public about where we're going into the future, so that we can anticipate things and provide a high equipment availability factor moving forward. I don't see any other directors with hands raised digitally. I don't hear any comments or questions now, but I appreciate the technical explanation here and the view forward of what work will happen, and then how that will be presented back to the board and the public. So I think without additional comments or questions, it does sound like we are prepared to move this to an action item for a vote to authorize the negotiation on Thursday. And so at the end of the day, when we discuss the clarification of the agenda for Thursday, it sounds to me like we are prepared to move this ahead. So unless there's any other comments, I think we can move to the next item on the Systems Committee agenda. And Troy, please continue with that one.
Great, thank you for that. So this next item is a labor contract for the replacement of the air preheater basket seals and the selective catalytic reduction equipment. If you remember, back in February and I believe in August, we came and got approval for the parts, and this is specifically for the labor to install those in NC2 next year. And so these are part of basic asset management principles, understanding the extent of condition and looking at expected life. These are all within kind of that expected life frame, ranges, and so we are looking to replace those particular items. Spring of 2023 is when the outage will be completed. And what we did kind of interestingly here is, sometimes you would go out for separate contracts for both pieces of equipment. We went out to see if we could optimize by having a single contract. We find sometimes that works quite well for us. And in this case, based upon the pricing, it actually did. We did receive 6 bids, and all those bids were legally responsive. Three of the bids were technically responsive, so thus 3 were not. And the ones that were not were really focused on taking exceptions to the terms and conditions, and was really more about the shifting of project risk away from the vendors. So those were excluded. After a thorough review, TEIC was the lowest and best bid, and we have a lot of experience with them. They've completed multiple projects for us in the past, so they're very familiar with the units too. It's probably why we saw a solid competitive bid for them. So right now we are asking for the board to approve this labor contract for us to be able to replace the parts that were approved earlier in the year.
Great. I appreciate the photos that we've got shown here. From a labor perspective, can you describe why we are seeking to contract this work and that this is not internally performed work?
I appreciate that. So especially with these large pieces of equipment, there's some uniqueness to some of the work being done, as well as we have a lot of additional maintenance activities that take place, online maintenance, things of that nature. So the capacity within our organization is pretty full, just based upon those normal maintenance type work and activities we have going on. And so we need additional help from the outside to expedite this. And there's other work that continues to take place during that time frame also. And Scott, I don't know if you want to provide any additional feedback to that, but that's the reason for the need to go outside.
Yeah, Troy, I think you hit the major aspects, and you did, mention that the replacement evolutions are very close in proximity based upon the plant layout. So optimizing in one contract and allowing the one contractor to do it really provides the most value in the safe coordination of the activity to be completed efficiently.
Great. Thank you for the clarification and explanation there. I don't see hands or hear comments from directors. So unless anybody jumps in here, it sounds like we are prepared to also advance this as an action item to approve the labor contract as recommended on Thursday. So appreciate the work by staff to get this ready and to find a qualified contractor to provide the work. With that, we have 2 policy items to discuss. So we can move to the report, monitoring report. And Brad, please tell us about SD9.
Yeah, very good, Director Williams. Well, thank you. Another discussion today on SD9, which is now Integrated System Planning. Mo, I appreciate you going to the next slide here. There was a little bit of a unique set of circumstances around how we progressed through this work. And if you missed last month's meeting, I'll give you just a brief synopsis of that. The board spent about a couple of years working on SD9 and refining it in a way that could better inform management on their expectation around how we would go about this process. And I appreciated the high quality collaboration we had in a lot of those settings. But we're going to report against the monitoring relative to the prior policy. It was very important for the board and for myself as well to advance the refined SD9. So if the titling is confusing to you, you're not alone. It used to be called resource planning. Now it's called integrated system planning. And on this slide here, we've just characterized kind of the order of magnitude enhancements that we've made and kind of why we've made them. So in the new policy, we talk about the system, I think in a more thorough way, acknowledging its interconnectedness. So we do a better job of articulating how the distribution system is connected to the transmission system, which is connected to utility scale resources, and how all of this works together. And as the distribution system becomes more complex, and we build a platform that we hope offers customers greater freedom in their choice of how they produce and or consume electricity, it's really important for us to understand really the integrated nature of this to make sure that we get the best outcomes. The other major enhancement we were able to make is, you see the second tack there in black, the reliability and resiliency kind of framework for how we go about this work. So we talked about our obligations both to the balancing authority or Southwest Power Pool. We talked about NERC, and then we identified some specific metrics that we wanted to report against to make sure that we were tracking the system well over time and that we could have a better conversation around the reliability profile of the district resources as well as the resource adequacy profile. And so I'm really excited for those future conversations, and I think they'll be a good tool for us to continue our advancement of moving this discussion forward. So we're reporting on a legacy SD. I think it'll be a good discussion today, but it will be a little different than if you were to go out to the district's SDs and look at the current state of SD9. So Mo, if you could go to the next slide, please, ma'am. Here's a summary of SD9. I'm not going to read this summary. I'm going to talk about each of these expectations as we go through the slides. And so you can see it there. That was the legacy form. And Mo, if we could go to slide 57, please. The first expectation is that the board of directors recognizes the district will have to adapt to a rapidly changing electric utility industry. There's been a lot of promulgation of this information and making sure that that these changes that we're making go as planned and go predictably to get the right system outcomes that we want, specifically to ensure reliable, competitive, cost-effective, and environmentally sensitive energy services. So there's really two primary kind of use case applications for resource planning. The first one is short term. So when we go through our process that I'll outline on a future slide, we're really looking at production modeling. What will our fuel cost budget be? What will our retail sales be for electric customers, as well as wholesale sales? How will our units integrate with the market? And we want to create a lot of certainty there for the benefit of our customer owners. The other application is kind of the longer term, and we've spent a lot of discussion on this the last, probably 2 years, year and a half at least, around what are our 2050 plans. How do those integrate with the integrated resource plan that was recently filed? And that's really the longer term application where you're talking about a higher degree magnitude of infrastructure changes. And I think that it's important for folks to kind of understand those two uniquely, how they're integrated, and the fact that we're constantly doing this work based on the dynamic nature of the industry that we operate in. We've listed a couple of tools that we use. We don't build a plan and hope it works. Okay. We use computationally intensive, and we use industry standard applications to make sure that the types of changes that we're talking about will have predictable outcomes. And so I've listed PSSE. That's primarily a transmission modeling tool. We use Aurora and ProMod, which is a dispatch or production modeling tool for how much the generators will run in the marketplace to satisfy demand. And then we use Itron, which is really a kind of a metering type platform, but they all come together in a really meaningful way to make sure we have the most thorough process we can. Within the process that you'll see on the next slide, we look at specific reliability metrics. And it's really important for us, I think, to talk more clearly in the public setting around those metrics we look at. I made the comment earlier, we don't decide on something and then hope it works. We're using these tools and these engineering formulas and estimates to make sure that our decisions are augmented well from a technical perspective. And so I just want to call out a few. If you don't understand them, I think that's okay. But we look at grid stability and inertia. Those things are occurring in the second duration. They're occurring right now as we speak. They're being solved instantaneously by the resources that we have, or they're being maintained instantaneously by the resources we have. We also look at reserves and regulation. This is something that occurs within minutes. We need to react to this in minutes, and so our operators in the ECC and at our generation facilities are laser focused on this. We also look at thermal capacity. So our transmission lines cannot absorb unlimited amounts of energy. They have technical specifications and limitations, and we're very, very focused on what those are. We look at voltage and the loss of load probability, which is effectively what are the times of the year and the magnitude that the system is most challenged, and how do we solve those sufficiently to get a predictable system. And that really occurs in various hours and days throughout the year. So we look at all of this hard, we look at it well. It's a very cross-functional process that includes, quite honestly, a wide array of perspectives and team members, both from electrical supply to generation, transmission operations, transmission planning, transmission engineering, and then of course load. And the process is robust. We look at a lot of supply and demand side options. If you remember back in power purpose days, if you can see the filter in your mind's eye, we had 70 million options. And so we try and be as robust and thorough as we can to get the best outcomes we possibly can achieve. Mel, if you could advance to 58, please. Here's a quick look at our process. I've talked about some specific purposes on the left for short-term and longer-term planning. The short-term was within the 5-year window, and the longer-term planning generally goes out 10, 15, 20 years and deeper. But if you look on the right, there's the process. The orange icons are the inputs. These are diverse. What the generation assets can do from an operability perspective. What are our load implications? What are the fuel prices? If the generator needs them. We put all of these things in, and we run them through the platforms that I talked about earlier. Aurora, ProMod, PSSE. We have a conversation around what are the risks associated with this portfolio or that portfolio, and how should we consider those risks or opportunities relative to the other strategic directives that we are using to achieve clarity on what our business needs to look like from an SD2 affordability perspective, from an SD4 reliability perspective, from an SD7 environmental stewardship. We take all of those perspectives and how the board has spoken into those SDs, and we push them together in this process with our engineering and other business leaders. Two quick comments. You'll see the purple boxes there. The first purple is left to right, generally right after the orange boxes, which is the input, getting stakeholder engagement on the front side, stakeholder engagement on the back side, and ideally stakeholder engagement all the way through. And we have another slide that'll talk to this as well. So Mo, slide 59, if you would, please. Here's the process that we executed in the decarbonization and the IRP plan. So the strategic directive charge is that we're going to periodically assess for strategic and integrated resource plans, our mix of generation assets, our demand side management programs, our purchase power agreements, and our renewable energy resources. Along the bottom was, I think, a very positive stakeholder evolution that we went through that was spearheaded by Ms. Olson in the stakeholder outreach. So as we went through the decarbonization process, we had specific milestones where we invited the customers in and other interested parties to have a discussion around how we were thinking about these things, whether it be the multi-sector modeling, whether it be our assumptions and scenarios, whether it be technology issues. And so that produced a really high satisfaction process back from our customers that I think we're going to be able to continue to build on into the future. Those things fed the IRP. So that bottom right image there is an image representing the integrated resource plan. We took that decarbonization work and we put it and fed it right into our IRP so that those two would be consistent as they relate to each other. Slide 60, please, Mo. The board also expects us to evaluate a wide range of future scenarios and assumptions. The way we go about doing that is we specifically induce volatility into the tools. And I just want to talk about a couple of those real quick. That top left gray box, the economy-wide scenarios, how fast does electrification occur? What are the various speeds of decarbonization that could occur? Those had a wide variety of potential futures, and it was really important for us to really understand the implications on the utility as we continue to afford Eastern Nebraska a life-saving product. We talked about the pace of decarbonization on the right. What are the implications potentially of carbon policy? Bottom left are emerging technologies. This is where we got a lot of really good customer feedback around the importance of looking at a broad set of technologies, evaluating where they're at on the maturity spectrum, when they might be a viable option for the district, and what we might need to watch as we progress through the next 28 years to get to 2050. We looked at technology costs, and a big one, we tried to double click on reliability resiliency. There's a lot of great publications out there where if you look at the bottom of the page, there's sometimes an asterisk and it says pending transmission analysis, or it says some other acknowledgement that there are other attributes of the system that have to be considered within the decision-making space of this subject. And so we tried to focus really intently on transmission and reliability metrics and really engage in that conversation, even though there can be challenges with that we'll have to manage over the coming decades. Mo, slide 60, please. So here's a couple of images around the ranges of different things that we considered. I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but you can see the various technologies on the far left. There were a couple of technologies that were identified as kind of the breakthrough technologies that we need to watch, whether it be nuclear or, I'm just going to say, hydrogen in mass, being able to use a lesser emitting fuel and having a robust and durable supply chain to be able to acquire that, or ammonia or any other potential feedstock or fuel technologies. And on the right, you see the various pathways of decarbonization that we're going to find ourselves on, one or the other. Mo, slide 62, please. Here's a, Mo, I think there's a animation here. So it's really important as we do our decarbonization and we talk about the IRP that we talk at higher quality levels around this is a 28-year journey. And so on the slide here, you can see that there are a number of findings, 8 in particular, that have been posted into the decarbonization report and that we've been trying to share as freely and as liberally in as many settings as we can get in. But there's some key things that have to happen over the next 3 decades for us to achieve this safely and reliably and get to the net zero by 2050. The top left one is we found that we think we can do this. Someone recently shared an analogy around Kennedy and getting to the moon in a decade. You didn't necessarily have all the answers. You didn't know exactly the path that would be taken to get there, but you had this idea through some analysis that this is conceptually possible. And we need to have these higher quality conversations along the road as we work to realize that future. Going over to the right side, the changing resource mix will pose new resiliency challenges that must be evaluated, understood, and mitigated. We talked about this a fair bit from June to August as it related to our North Omaha facility and the timing and the sequencing of generation changes and the critical and honestly unforgiving nature. If you get those out of order, you're going to get a bad outcome. And so it was important for us, I think, to remember this finding. And I think that finding will be important in the future. And then one more on the bottom left, we called out that firm generation is needed to maintain resource adequacy. This is really a comment around dispatchability for those periods where intermittents or renewables are not there. We need to have a reliable source of electric supply to come back on, and we need to have the plan to execute that in advance of when those events happen. So I think I'm almost through here. Mo, maybe one more slide if you don't mind, please. I kind of recapped this earlier, but we wanted to get down on paper for folks that are going to follow this after the meeting. I talked about 2, 4, 7. Also wanted to acknowledge customer satisfaction. What are we hearing from customers on what they want our future generation to be, and how do we work towards those goals? You know, resource planning is the process, or now integrated system planning is the process that we'll pursue to achieve those various goals. SD11, economic development, 13, stakeholder outreach and engagement, and 15, ERM are definitely center mass to these resource decisions that we're going to make. So Mo, one more slide if you might, please. This is probably, and Mo, I'm gonna slow, if you go back 2 animations here, please. One more, thank you. So we're going through a significant evolution here around moving from the plan and executing to get it done. And that is a significant evolution that needs to have progress. And so as a reminder, you know, we called for, at the high side, 1,200 megawatts of nameplate generation back in 2019. We talked about the significance of that back in 2019. We talked about the why behind that back in 2019. But these resources were identified to solve a growing community. So as all of our customer classes grow, we've all seen the construction, we've all seen our community grow and expand, and we're honored to play our role in that. There are real implications to the utility in this space. And so we need the incremental natural gas and the incremental solar, both, to solve this problem in a predictable way. And so as we kind of, I don't want to say leave the planning, but as we double click, so to speak, on the execution piece, I wanted to provide some images to really do a better job of making this real for folks. So the first image, the dark gray is our current resources. The light gray is our demand response. The dark black line is our load. our peak load specifically, and the dotted line is the planning reserve margin. So this is the regulatory obligation that we have to carry above our expected peak to make sure that we get predictable system outcomes, or as predictable as we can. So you can see there across the whole year, we have a deficiency. That dotted line is the deficiency, the white space between the top of the gray and the dotted line. We kind of get close there in April. But Mo, if you go to the next animation, please. Here's what the natural gas does. The natural gas provides the dispatchability that we need to be able to operate the system predictably, and it really solves the non-peak times. So if you look before May, from January to May, or you look from mid to late September to December, we've solved those from a resource adequacy perspective. The white in this image between the peak load and the dotted black line is unsolved from a local resource perspective. So Mo, if you go to the next slide, this is the profile fit of the utility scale solar relative to our load and our resource obligations. And you can see the cleanliness. You can see how it matches our profile efficiently. And you probably don't have to be an engineer to know that that white space, if it doesn't get solved, could present some unique challenges for us. And so as we work towards partnering with our communities, as we work towards continuing the execution of utility scale solar to really match that on peak time, we want to augment that discussion with visuals that helps make this real for folks so that they can understand the importance and the criticality of a utility that has a growing load and the implications of having sustained challenges of bringing resources on. And we hope these images are helpful, but the combined natural gas and solar cannot be broken apart. They don't work if only one is achieved and the other is not. And I think we just want to be consistent and faithful messengers to really continue to articulate the importance of this. And I believe slide 65 is the close, and I'd love to answer any questions that may arise.
Great, thanks very much, Brad. I'll look for hands and listen for comments. I do see Director Mulhoff's hand up, so let's go there first.
Thank you. This is great work, and I really appreciate the diligence that you had and all of the really comprehensive and thoughtful way that you're approaching system and the resource management. Given that we've been having these delays, going forward, is there a way to compress the timeline for these decision-making so that we can really be more agile in responding to increased load that we're being asked to provide? I mean, is there a way to compress the timeline? Because, you know, from what I understand, power with purpose planning and now the implementation has just taken a lot longer than we expected. And so is there a way to compress that and decrease the timeline that we've needed to do the planning part, at least, you know, for making sure that we're able to respond to requests for increased load?
Director Mulhoff, you bring up a fantastic point, and one that, frankly, that's consuming the majority of my time as president and CEO of this organization, which is how do we keep the lights on, number one? How do we keep this community thriving? How do we keep economic prosperity in our service territory alive and well? It's really interesting. If you go back, Brad or Mo, if you go back one or two slides, please. There. If if you look at that planned reserve margin that we have in 2027, that is now, it is in excess of 3,000 megawatts. Our load, the solid dark line, it's at the 3,000 megawatt level. That's in 2027. Today, our peak load is under 2,600 megawatts. So one aspect that you don't see necessarily on these graphs, and it's, we couldn't show you the whole thing, is the rapid growth that we are experiencing in our service territory. What you see in front of you is a snapshot as of what we expect in 2027 to be. But we are adding about 100 megawatts per year of load to our service territory. When you compare that to the magnitude here, it's pretty significant. Everything is growing. All industries, manufacturing, residential, of course, industrial, data centers, everything is adding to that pressure. So in order for us to continue to serve the needs of our customer owners, we need to act really, really quick. People are coming into our service territory, which is great. They are investing in our service territory. They want to stay here. They want to keep our communities vibrant. We need to act, and we need to build generation as fast as we can. Now, to the point that you made on solar, it takes quite a bit of land. That's undeniable, right? And so coordinating with local communities, with county commissioners, with planning commissions has been at the forefront of what I've been doing for the past 12 months. It's not an easy conversation, and we have seen many different county commissioners and county commissions place moratoriums on new solar or new wind, and we're working with them, trying to help them understand what a new facility could look like. But also very important, let them know how important these projects are to keep the lights on. They are not nice to haves. They are not pet projects of anyone. They are incredibly important, as you can see here on this graph. So we will continue to work with county commissioners, planning commissions, landowners. It is not easy, but we will get this done. I am incredibly grateful for the work that everyone at OPPD and our counterparts in county commissions and planning commissions have done for us. We're moving in the right direction. It's taking a little longer because this is new. County commissions have never had to approve these large amounts of land for solar generation. So it's something new. We are partnering with them. We want to make sure that we are a good community partner as we move forward. I hope that helps.
I'd like to jump in here real quick and ask a follow-up. Javier, you mentioned the growth that we're seeing in our community, load growth, as well as other things like electrification. New business development, growth of population in the area, as well as electrification. And I guess I'd like to take that over to Brad. Javier mentioned something like 100 megawatts per year. Can you provide some insight on the way in which our model for both peak demand in the future and overall consumption leads us into some of the forward-looking need for resources? Do we, for example, we said something like 100 megawatts per year of recent load growth. Do we anticipate that type of load growth increase or continuing into the future? Or how do we project what we think will be occurring on the load growth side in the future?
Well, let me, and before Brad jumps in really quick, so take the pathways to decarbonization, right? We studied many pathways, and during those pathways, the high electrification was one of the many pathways we studied. In that high electrification scenario, we clearly saw that one of the scenarios could be that our load could be 2.5 times what our load is today. It could be in 2050. 2.5 times, right? That is more than double our current load. So it's about, if our current load is 2,500, add another 2,500, we have 28 years to get there. That's about 100 megawatts per year, right? So it is not, when I see the current load growth we have, and Brad, I'll let you chime in here. Whether or not this growth continues and it's stable for the next 28 years or not, it's yet to be seen. But when I look at that high electrification scenario under pathways to decarbonization, and I see the growth we're experiencing today, they both start to match very closely. Right? and we better be prepared to serve that high electrification scenario into the future. And the work starts yesterday. Brad, I don't know anything that you want to share there.
I think it's a great ad, and I know Director Williams and I discussed this a fair bit over the last few weeks. And you know, if you go back into the decarbonization report, like you suggested, the load through 25 and 26 is a dark line. We feel like it is relatively definitive. The load from 26 and beyond is presented in a span. We have kind of a high load, we have kind of a low load, and I think Javier, you're doing a nice job of talking about the importance of, if it's high load, if it's electrification at those types of magnitudes, we need to understand that. Our regulators need to understand that. Our communities need to understand that. Our community leaders need to understand that. And so it's a very unique position that the utility's in from an education obligation perspective to continue to pursue those conversations with as many people that will be willing to have them, and really understand that if the community goes this way, these are the implications and subsequently the types of ways that we might work together to get the best outcome for everybody. So those would be my only modest supplements. I think that may be what you were referring to, Director Williams, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And as was highlighted, we have multiple different documents that show us forward looks, including the pathways of decarbonization and the varying intensities of load growth. Appreciate that. I have asked a couple times in the past, and I'd like to ask one more time about the way our policies encourage and allow resource planning to, as CEO Fernandez has said, build margin for the future. As he described, the potential for electrification or even the high electrification scenario to significantly increase both our peak and our total consumption leads me to want to make sure that we are proactively encouraging deployment of resources to be prepared for that scenario, because I think the likelihood of some electrification and even lots of electrification seems to be growing in certainty every day. And we see increasing adoption of new electrification technologies, most obviously electric vehicles, but also heat pumps in homes, electrification of industry. So can you talk a little bit about the way in which our policy allows and encourages staff to be proactive and help build a margin, that terminology that we've used in the past, for the future?
Well, since I brought that terminology, I'll chime in really quick. I think it's pretty easy for me to point to the graph on the right of the slide. You know, it doesn't show a lot of margin. It shows that solar and gas under the power with purpose strategy helps us meet the peak demand in 2027, but it doesn't necessarily leave a lot of ample margin to grow any more than that, right? So while we're actively working towards that end and solving these the current demand, it'll be incredibly important for my staff, and Brad's team is on point to do this, is continue to study and start at some point in the near future, start talking to the executive team, eventually to the board and to the public about what is next. What is the next set of resources we need to continue to build? Because this is not going to stop here, right? We're solving the 2027 issue here, but in order for us to stay ahead of the curve, I believe more resources are going to be needed. More resources, including demand response, right? Not everything has to be generating megawatt or megawatt hours, but also programs for us to save megawatts and megawatt hours. But it's going to be a combination of both. Very likely, it's going to come back to the board, and we need to be ready to accommodate the growth that we have been blessed with here in the region. Brad, anything I missed?
Nothing to add, sir.
Great, appreciate that. We have two items back to back. It's the SD9 monitoring report, but we will discuss an SD7 policy update. And I wanted to flag during this discussion, when we made the updates from the resource planning to the integrated system planning description, we talked about not wanting SD9 to guide with specific metrics any additional desired outcomes. And so perhaps if we can go back a couple slides here, I think it's slide 61, Mo. We see a potential future resource deployment There's two graphs. Let's see. One more. There we go. Potential future resource deployment as well as pace of decarbonization. And so, again, I wanted to clarify that when we discussed the SD9 policy update and what we've looked at in this monitoring report, we did not intend SD9 to be the location where discussions of policy and objectives would be included, but instead that should be under SD7. And we'll talk about that next, but the two are very closely related. And so when we look forward and project pace of decarbonization, the desired policy location for the board to express what we would like to see in the future is intended to be in SD7 as an input, as Brad said, into guiding our resource planning for the future. And so this was a point that we specifically talked about in during the discussion of SD9, and I wanted to flag it now because we are about to have back-to-back discussions on the two topics. But as we look forward, I just want to be clear that we do not intend SD9 to set those metrics. That is SD7. And so when we look at SD7, we should keep in mind that it is intended to have an influence on the resource planning process. It is an input into the resource planning process and helps guide where the board would like to see the organization moving in the future. And Brad, I don't know if you have any additional comments about the way in which those two work together, but I did just want to flag that because there has been a lot of discussion in this area and sometimes some overlap and confusion between the two. Do you have any additional thoughts about the way in which they work together?
No, I do, just briefly, and I would only supplement that, 2 speaks into this from an affordability, cost competitive perspective. 4 speaks into this. We expect a reliable system, and reliability enables us to do all these things. 7 speaks into this from how do we want to become better environmental stewards, and so there are a number of SDs. I think they were cited on the 2 or 3 slides past this, but those all speak into this around the specific expectations that the strategic outcomes from the board would like to see, and then we solve for those within the process of 9, and 9 really talks to the process. What are we going to measure? What are the outcomes that we want? And then those are augmented by the other expectations in some very meaningful ways.
And Mo, if you could jump to slide 63, that list is included there. Brad, thank you for the additional clarification there. As you said, I mentioned SD7 because it's next on the agenda, but SD2, SD4 is on the board work plan for a pending update, and we anticipate additional discussion about metrics related to reliability that would be an input into our resource planning process. And so I know that it feels like I am belaboring this point, but I think it's critical that the board and the public understand that there are other directives which we have a responsibility to update as the desired direction of the organization, which feed into the integrated system planning process. And so when we discuss those other strategic directives, we should keep in mind that the metrics there guide the way in which our resource planning occurs. And again, I only mention that because we are about to move into immediately in a few minutes here a discussion of that very topic. And we will have through the systems committee a discussion on reliability with anticipated metrics. As Director Yoder pointed out, the work on rates will guide metrics that will help to be an input into the resource planning process. So just want to clarify that that's how this is intended to work. That's why there are not metrics in SD9. And so when the monitoring report is presented, we are not expecting metrics here specifically because this is about the process. And so I don't see additional hands raised or additional input or comments here now. So if we can skip to the end, the recommendation from the systems committee was to find it's sufficiently compliant and to move this to an action item for approval on Thursday. And I don't hear any comments from any directors now who are either on the systems committee or who are not on the systems committee. And with that pause, I guess we'll anticipate that moving forward as an action item on the agenda on Thursday. And we can move to the next item on the agenda today, and that is the SD7 policy update.
Excellent. Okay, SD7 was well teed up by Director Williams. This is my name's on this, but this is a partnership specifically with Miss Olson and her organization, as well as with the utility operations folks. And so you can see SD7 there. The board has prescribed their expectations around what our environmental stewardship strategically looks like. And as a result of the discussions, primarily from the June to August timeframe, the board heard customer feedback through a various amount of settings, specifically community events and board contacts through OPPD Community Connect and other phone calls that were made, where the decision was made that we want to make a tweak to SD7 to better communicate and document what the expectations are around our near-term emissions profile. And so I'm not going to read SD7 to you. It's available online. And Mo, if you could go to slide 70, please. So here is our, my term is boiler template, but here is kind of the process that Mr. Foch has laid out on how SDs are identified to be worked. I'll just touch briefly on it. They're placed on a board work plan. They're prioritized with the other items on the work plan. They're discussed with the board chair and the CEO around how do we work this as an organization based on the priority. It gets dispositioned to a committee. The committee works with the SMEs in those areas, and then it's brought back to the board for broader consideration and potential action. So a few comments here. We really added this to the work plan around the middle of August, and it was as a result of the culmination of customer feedback related to our decision to extend the planned refuel retirement date at the North Omaha facility. Once it was added to the work plan, we dispositioned it to a committee, and the committee discussion and recommendation development really occurred about the first week in September up until today, where we're going to have board review and decision and potentially a vote on September 22nd. So that's our process and a little bit of the history specifically to this particular SD modification. And so Mo, if you could go to slide 71, please. Here is the SD in its current state, supplemented with the red lines. So there's a couple of administrative red lines in the top box to document when changes occur and to give clarity and line of sight to the resolution that those changes were administered through. And the bottom sentence here is really the primary change. And I talked about the collaboration with Ms. Olson's organization and specifically Jeremy Bowers. And so I'm going to welcome them into the conversation here, but I'll just read it briefly. By year end 2027, achieve an approximate 3.5 million ton annual reduction in CO2 emissions at the North Omaha Station site relative to OPPD's 2013 benchmark of approximately 3.9 million tons at the station. And so what we tried to do with this language is we tried to be clear on where the emissions reductions are coming from, when the emissions reductions will be achieved, and so that we could calibrate the conversation around those things. And so, Jeremy, I'll welcome you.
Brad,
Yeah.
really quick, just one point of clarification. I think we all understand what we're doing here, but let me just, for the record and for those members of the public attending, part of the discussion at the last board meeting in August, when we asked the board to approve the resolution to extend the operations of North Omaha Station as they currently are, we talked about the approximately 3-year period, and we also talked about the need to have some flexibility on the specific date for the conversion of the North Omaha Station. We talked about all the details and the why we needed that flexibility. And the feedback we got from the board, and as you mentioned from the public, was, okay, we understand that, but how is OPPD going to be held accountable, or what mechanisms do we have to ensure that after 2026, that we do see that reduction in emissions, that conversion does happen in that time frame? And so the idea here was, okay, we have SD7 and we're using this mechanism to hold us accountable for that reduction in CO2 emissions. And we say here by the year end of 2027 to give us a full year of operations, assuming that the transition happens sometime before 2026. By 2027, we should see this dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions at the North Omaha Station as a result of the refueling of units 4 and 5 and the retirements of units 1, 2, and 3. So I'm connecting these to the board decision from last month. That is how these two work together, and that was the genesis for this revision. Again, I apologize for the redundancy. I'm guessing all board members remember these, but just for the public.
Very good. I think I heard Brad kind of tip it over to me here as we look a little closer at this language. So I really appreciated the conversation at the systems committee meeting a couple of weeks ago to arrive particularly at the simplicity of this language, right? It's very simple, very straightforward. With the goal has just been discussed, right, of holding the district accountable and reportable for the conversion of North Omaha 4 and 5 and the retirement of 1 through 3. So to accomplish this accountability, again, the language here very straightforward on a ton reduction, annual ton reduction basis. And then the last part was added per the request of the systems committee, if you remember that conversation, to put that benchmark number there right in the language. The 3.5 million tons is representative of that reduction that was already achieved through the conversion of units 1 through 3. It's approximately 1.7 million tons. And the expected reduction from the total cessation of coal combustion at the site of units 4 and 5, and that's a projected 1.8 million tons. Recognizing, of course, and as the conversation already this morning, alludes to constantly, the natural variations in dispatch and capacity factor that impact our emissions profile also, and it'll continue to do so post-conversion. So the 3.5 million tons, I guess said simply, right, is sharply focused on this desired accountability around the conversion timeline. So if there's any other kind of specific questions around it, we can get into those details, but that's the straightforward summary.
Hearing nothing from Ms. Olson, but wanting to respect that, Director Williams, I'd turn it back over to you, sir.
Great, thanks very much. So yeah, I think important points to highlight here. This was in response to developing accountability on the successful completion of North Omaha Station as discussed. That was covered in August, and so this is based on public input and public feedback. That's what led to the policy recommendation we have here. I think one other point to highlight, this does not mean that we guarantee it won't happen before the end of 2026. And so we've talked about the potential for an interim generation interconnection agreement to be approved. Brad, can you just clarify that in the event that we are able to bring on new resources sooner, we could see annual emissions reductions prior to the end of 2026. So we're not guaranteeing that we wait until the end of 2026, but that is the anticipated kind of end of the timeline for when we have most confidence that will be completed. Can you elaborate a little?
Yeah, great call out, Director Williams, that the timeline is really a milestone-based timeline on our ability to achieve some compliance-related matters. So in the event, to the heart of your question, in the event we're able to bring on the gas facilities on an interim basis and within the framework of market rules, and consistent with our culture, there may be opportunities for us to bring down emissions volumes over time. And we would continue to pursue those the same way we've pursued those over the last, over the last 9 years, as you can see on OPPD's emissions publication on the website, where you see that steady decrease over time. That's due to a lot of reasons. I probably won't try and unpack them all right now. But our expectation is that reliability and cost continue to be a focus for us, and that the emissions profile over time would continue to be thoughtfully reduced. So, thank you, sir.
I think I'm up next. I had 2 questions. That was one of them, so thank you for hopping in on that, Director Williams. The other is related to our approach for public engagement on this. So as you've underscored, this change is a result of several months of feedback and conversation, which to me underscores the fact that we're kind of always doing public engagement and taking that in and using that to sort of adjust course as needed. It's not a one and done situation. I also acknowledge that our standard process for SD changes is to get them out into the world in this format and then allow for 30 days for people to weigh in on them. So are we foregoing that 30 days? And if the answer is yes, we're locked in on this, I think that's probably fine, but I just kind of want to make sure that we have a conversation about the merits and or drawbacks of going right to vote on Thursday versus waiting until October.
And Director Moody, if I may, great question. One other aspect of this is Part of the discussion with the team and discussions I've had with board members individually was this language at the proposed new language comports with the same projections that we had in 2019 when we asked the board to approve the Power with Purpose projects. Right, so we went back to that plan and said, okay, this is what we're gonna do. This is what's gonna happen when we retire units 1, 2, and 3, and we refuel 4 and 5. And so this language is really not new to the equation here. It's really reflecting the board's intentions back in 2019. We are adding more specificity on the year, but I think that's important an important piece to consider, in that it's not necessarily new. That doesn't mean that the 30-day waiting period could not be considered here, but I wanted to make sure that it's not new. It's reinforcing something that has been discussed in the past, and the basis under which we made the board made the 2019 decision.
Yeah, and that thereby sort of points out that the public engagement process dates all the way back to 2019 in some ways to inform that decision. So that's super helpful. And I would also just, it's no secret that I think the board, and I don't want to speak for the board, but certainly members of the board, some have expressed interest in interim metrics. And so this is the manifestation of that. And so I appreciate how concrete and specific it is. Is something that I think we've been curious and pining for. So I like to see that it's there. So thank you for that. Again, I don't know if there's any further conversation necessary about a 30-day sort of window for the public to weigh in, but just wanted to make sure we ran that to ground.
Yeah, Director Moody, if I can jump in there real quick. This was responsive to comments we received in the short term related to North Omaha Station. And the metrics that are specified here are reactive to resource planning discussion that has already occurred. So it is not proactive in specifying additional or different resource planning. And so in the systems committee, we did discuss that because we are responding to input that has been received, and this does not specify any different or more strenuous future restrictions on activities or anything like that, we did feel comfortable in the committee suggesting that this be ready for a vote in September. So we did have that discussion because it is reactive, not a proactive new shift in policy for the future.
Yep, and I appreciate that, Director Williams. And again, just wanted to make sure that I understood kind of the rationale and the history there. So I'm good. Thank you.
Director Yoder, do you have a question? I see a hand there.
Yeah, it's if kind of follows the same thinking, but a different subject really. And I know and I think the next slide asks if we are going to act on this month or should it go back to committee? And I guess I'm curious how the committee got to this point when it opened SD7 for changes. And it responded to public feedback. So I think you're doing a good job by adding this bullet. But I think there was more public feedback that could have been woven into changes for SD7. Longstanding and pressing customer feedback. I mean, I understand that CO2 is a problem. It's a clear problem. But even more clear and more present are the risks associated with other emissions. And I think there are opportunities. I think there are opportunities that I offered to the committee as subsequent to our actions in last month in August. We can change the language. Our specific language now is really silent on the issue of other emissions, other than we will meet regulations. And it implies, I think, or could be perceived that as long as we are meeting regulations, there are no environmental impacts. And I, honestly, I really have long been uncomfortable with that. I would like to be more specific that there are impacts. And the comments that we got from the people most affected, or most, if not most affected, closest to the emissions, I think made it clear that they're concerned about it. So Director Williams and committee members, can you share with me why there were not other changes being offered at this time?
Yeah, so from a committee process standpoint, I think in past chair reports, I've indicated that the Systems Committee has discussed interim metrics on carbon emission reduction timeline most of this year, and we have been anticipating work on that in the last part of 2022. The additional feedback we received leading up to the North Omaha Station action in August, and then even after that vote about the accountability, led the committee to discuss how that policy discussion might be slightly adjusted to provide a mechanism of accountability from employees to executive leadership team to board to the public. And so this is ongoing work on the interim metric portion of SD7 that has been slightly adjusted now in a short-term mechanism to achieve that desired accountability. We did also discuss in the Systems Committee, per your comments about SD7, additional updates to the policy. The general consensus was that while the additional changes are valuable and generally supported, the technical work behind updates to include additional metrics on non-carbon related emissions would be probably more challenging than we are prepared to have done in September or maybe even in October. And so the decision by the committee was that that does have merit and does warrant additional discussion. But in order to facilitate the accountability that we discussed related to the timeline at North Omaha Station, this policy would be recommended by the committee. There were additional steps that were discussed in the committee about the way in which we communicate information related to non-carbon emissions. I don't know if perhaps Lisa or Brad, if one of you could respond. We intend and anticipate communication related to this policy update about non-carbon emissions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you provide a little elaboration on the mechanism we intend for that communication?
Yeah, I'll defer to Jeremy on that, and because I know he's been working with the team on that.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I think the direction that we're following is in the press release that would include this language, right? We would point out to the fact that the goal here, again, as has been discussed, is to hold the district accountable for this direction to this East Burning Coal in North Omaha. But CO2, and to Director Yoder's point, isn't the only emission source. The value here is the simplicity of direction and the speed at which we can get this incorporated into the strategic directive. The actual language and the description of this change, we can provide then what the other impacts are, right? Along with the CO2, we'll see a reduction in SO2 and in NOx and in PM 2.5. And so we'll have a communication around that and provide that context at that time.
As well as the SD7 monitoring report is coming up, which we have been working on as well. So you'll see that correlation as a reduction happens.
Great. I appreciate that clarification on the way in which we'll present information. And Director Yoder, back to your comments, your indication of compliance with regulation not being equated with there being no impacts from operations, I think is a point well taken. And we did discuss this in the committee. And I want to be careful about not expressing too much opinion on a topic that's not being considered for action right now. But the committee did discuss that point specifically, and I think generally agreed that we should investigate that concept in more detail in the future, but that the complexity of the association between regulatory compliance and impacts is probably a more broad topic than we were prepared to respond on just a couple weeks after the initial discussion about North Omaha Station, or again, even in the next month or so. That probably needs more work. I think as Lisa pointed out, the SD7 monitoring report is coming up in the next month or two, I believe. And so when that occurs, I think that would be an excellent time for discussion about the way in which our current language specifies compliance with regulation, and if the board has additional direction or guidance on the way we would like to make additional updates to SD7 to measure those impacts. And as a reminder, we did indicate in the resolution related to North Omaha Station that there would be ongoing work with specifically public stakeholder input about understanding and assessing and reducing the impacts related to other emissions, non-carbon emissions. And so we have policy language or resolution language, more specifically from last month, that clarifies that as an intended action. And we have an upcoming discussion during the monitoring report when the current language will be open for discussion, and we will have more technical information available from staff. So I just wanted to clarify that this was not a point that was skipped through lightly, but that both past discussion and near-term upcoming discussion will provide opportunity to clarify that relationship between regulatory compliance and impacts from non-carbon emissions. So I do see your hand, and I want to make sure and give you an opportunity to jump back in there regarding those responses.
Thanks for that. While it's specific to these changes are specific to one of the comments and one of the interests that were expressed in the many different sources of feedback we got from customers, I guess I still feel that the other emissions and their impacts should be addressed as we have this open at a time when we are trying to specifically respond to concerns from the community. Not going to happen. I understand that, but that's my input. Thank you.
And Lisa, I saw your comment typed there, and so Director Yoder, I would like to give Lisa an opportunity to clarify that it's not going to happen. It's that it is not included in the current recommended policy revision. And so, Lisa, can you clarify an additional item later today that will be related to this?
Absolutely. In fact, the team's been working on the North Omaha engagement outline. This is going to be new territory for us. While we've always been listening to our customers, we're going on a listening tour. So Director Yoder, we will be able to pick up the comments of a wide array of individuals and organizations during the next several weeks and months. And you'll see that during the PI, which we presented earlier last week. Thank you.
I think the only thing
I appreciate that you're doing that. I do. Again, I've heard it. I've heard it from my 6 years on the board. I mean, I've heard the input, and I feel that there's been plenty of study already. But thank you for putting in the time and resources to find more clarity.
And I thought I heard an additional response. Perhaps it was Brad. Did you have any additional comments there, Brad?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I didn't mean to get in the middle of that conversation. I was just going to suggest that it's important for us to keep in mind that this date is our best estimation. This is the date that we think this will happen, and that was in response to community feedback on if you have to operate within these sets of circumstances, what should we expect? And my understanding is the board was trying to codify the expectation of when this might happen, dependent upon our latest understanding of when certain milestones would be achieved. So I just want to make a general comment here. There's no uncertainty around the date. The date and the tonnage is solid based on our latest estimation of our ability to achieve compliance milestones. So thank you for letting me make that comment.
And Director Yoder, to your point, I think I would summarize the committee's feelings about additional discussions that the date and the tonnage is necessary in order to meet the needs of what was discussed in August, but not sufficient for continued investigation into the way in which SD7 can be updated. And so we do intend additional discussions, and as Lisa pointed out, we have additional opportunities for public input that we hope will inform additional consideration of policy language updates in SD7. But we felt it was necessary in the very short term to make sure and deliver on the accomplishment of accountability for the date and tonnage that is listed here in the language. So I sense your frustration, and I agree with you that additional work is necessary here. And I would say that the committee also agreed with you that additional work on SD7 is necessary. And as the director representing North Omaha, who worked very hard to include the language about understanding and reducing the impacts for the people I represent, specifically correlated with North Omaha Station, I very strongly hear what you are saying, and I assure you that I will continue to be heavily focused on implementing policy that will understand and reduce those impacts. And I look forward to working with other directors in that direction in the future. I see Director Mulhoff's hand. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that in our committee meeting, we did talk about all types of emissions. And one of the things that was brought up was that we could list out all of the emissions, but that CO2 really is kind of an indicator, or it's just, and if you decrease CO2, you have a corresponding decrease in the other emissions as well. So, you know, for clarity and simplicity, we didn't want to list all of the emissions here, but that CO2 is kind of an indicator of our intent to decrease all emissions and not just CO2. So I just want to, because we had talked about that in the committee meeting, I wanted to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mulhoff. If I could respond to that, I think absolutely from being in that meeting, appreciate that. You know, the term using the CO2 as a proxy to indicate the board's intent is absolutely what the goal is here. And so, yeah, I just want to acknowledge that is the goal. We're not skirting that. So thanks.
Great. And I do have one final thought here. I mentioned that the systems committee has discussed interim metrics for a while, and I think we anticipated potentially having additional metrics that were more forward-looking years out into the future. This metric, again, is reactive to resource planning decisions and recommendations and actions the board has already taken. And so, Brad, if you can help clarify some of the additional information that would inform potential additional interim metrics. I believe we have some ongoing resource planning work over this year and next year that I anticipate would help us to expect a timeline for a potential additional interim metric to be included. Can you help clarify some of that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. My recollection of our discussions it involves the tension between some of the SDs that may conflict with each other as we go through the process. And so being able to understand the state of the system in the immediacy as well as the intermediate future really would inform any sort of system decisions or asset decisions that we were contemplating making. So I'm not sure I hit your point there, Director Williams, but I think that's how we'd think about it.
So yeah, this is somewhat of a throwback to the SD9 discussion we just had, but there are advanced feasibility studies is where I was going.
Yes. So thank you, sir. So the advanced feasibility studies, when we left the decarbonization or closed the formal work around that, we talked about the different things that really need to be understood from a technical perspective at a higher resolution level to allow us to move forward. And so just as a general reminder for the group, that's what Director Williams is referring to. That work is ongoing, whether it's you know, the impact to the distribution system of electrification or other things that were discussed at that time. We have a substantial amount of our colleagues that are getting their heads and hearts around that work. And as we finish the COP, we're gonna package that all up together, and we'll have a big discussion with the board towards the middle to end of Q4 on what that looks like for next year. So I hope that was more helpful, Director Williams.
Yes, middle and end of 2023 for discussion about advanced feasibility studies, and that is anticipated to be necessary work in order to discuss additional potential interim metrics. That's kind of what I was getting at. I appreciate you clarifying that because I did receive public feedback about why are we setting an interim metric only based on actions that have already been undertaken. I think we have sufficiently covered the need for this interim metric, but interim metrics looking forward, there are next steps in our resource planning process that will help inform that. So I appreciate the clarification and giving us an idea of when additional discussion would be appropriate. So with that, I don't see any additional hands. I guess the question here, the last slide makes it quite straightforward. Do we anticipate that this item is ready for a board resolution and an action item and a vote on Thursday, or do we feel that there is additional discussion necessary? Does anyone have strong feelings that they would like to express? I would say that the default position here, the committee felt that based on public feedback that had been received already, and as a response to providing the accountability in the timeline, that this was ready for an action item and a vote on Thursday. Does anyone have any final comments they would like to offer in a different direction between the two options we see?
Well, I'll just weigh in for preference for option one. As we've stated, these SDs should, and do sort of evolve pretty consistently without being earth-shattering moves. So I think let's make progress and then continue the conversations about what comes next.
Yeah, this is Sarah. I'll just echo that sentiment. I think, because when we were taking the North Omaha vote, we had a conversation publicly about wanting to make these modifications, and we were very deliberate in the committee about making sure that the language reflected those conversations and those discussions. I think it's appropriate to move forward with option one.
Great. I want to make sure and provide sufficient time for any alternative comments or thoughts. But again, with due understanding that Director Yoder and others have expressed support for additional discussion related to SD7 in the future, it sounds like we do believe that we are ready to advance this under option one for a resolution and a vote on Thursday. So I believe that that can be finalized at the end of the day here as we talk about the agenda for Thursday. And with that, I believe that is the last item on the Systems Committee agenda for today. And so I'll pass it back to Chair Bogner.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to take half an hour for lunch break. So we will return at 12:50 p.m. Thank you. All right, we'll get going again. Up next here, we have the Public Information Committee report from Director Mulhoff.
Sorry. So we met on September 13th, and we had a legislative and regulatory update. We had a review of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is kind of exciting, and an ongoing evaluation of how this is going to affect OPPD operations directly. We talked about the North Omaha engagement, and I think that Lisa and her team are going to do a presentation on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Director Mulhoff. Well, it's my pleasure to give an outline of what the team's been working on. And as you know from my team, they love a challenge. So new opportunities to evolve. And next month, you'll hear in the SD13 monitoring report, really how the team has matured. We have a maturity model that we'll be capturing, and the growth that we have done over the years. So this is just another chapter in that, and I'm really excited about it. You'll also hear about while we do the IAP2, we're also overlaying the Deloitte trust model. And with that comes humanity, transparency, credibility, and integrity. And just quickly, I just want to go over humanity. Create genuine connections to understand the unique needs of our stakeholders and lead with empathy. Transparency. Instill confidence in OPPD's brand and reputation through open communication and intentional interactions, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. Credibility, share and advance the capabilities of our people to strengthen relationships and inform sound decision making. You'll see that from SD7 and how that's going to evolve as well. And last but not least, integrity. Act as servant leaders, focusing on growth and well-being of our communities. And what I mean by that is, we want our communities to thrive. This isn't just about the utility. What can we do in economic development? What can we do with the outreach that we do in those communities? So you'll hear a little bit more about that. So next slide, Mo. And you can advance to the next one as well. So this one is a little bit unique. And you're going to be part of that, the board, even before we go out to the public. in your resolution, you had great intent. And so what we want to do is talk basically one-on-one with you to talk about what do you mean by engage with local educational, public health, and community-led organizations? And what do you mean by understanding the benefits and developing action plans to reduce overall impacts? I know we had a lot of discussion when you were building that resolution, and so I think that could mean something different to each of you as well. We will report back out to the public those conversations as well. So I'm going to pass it over now, Tim O'Brien, so we can talk a little bit specifically. This is going to be a phased approach. And you're also going to see in IAP2 that we're going to come and go in various of informed consent, collaborate over the various phases. But we need some time to do this because this isn't just engaging about utility, right? It's engaging on healthcare. We're going to be talking to organizations all across the community. The beauty of this is we want this to be a staple in our toolkit that we can use in our other communities as well as decisions are being made along that. So with that, Tim, next slide, please.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, board members. It's a pleasure to talk with you about our engagement plan. I and team are personally really excited about this. And so we've got a handful of slides to lay out where we're headed and to learn and get insight and perspective along the way. One thing I want to highlight that Lisa mentioned is we pulled forward, I think, one of our best practices from stakeholder engagement from the integrated resource plan and our decarbonization efforts is go listen to our stakeholders and ask them some key and consistent questions. And so you'll see that come through in subsequent slides. So I wanted to just pull that forward as well. And as Lisa mentioned, we're moving through different levels of the 5 levels of the IAP2 spectrum. And so first was to inform about the resolution and the needs to extend North Omaha Station for the greater OPPD electric system and region. And so now we're moving into this consultation phase. And on the right, this is the definition pulled right from the IAP2 framework. So I wanted to highlight that, but get real crisp on what our objectives, measurement, and actions are. And there's a couple slides here that will speak to more specifics, and Kate Thomas will jump in and help me as well. So first, on the objective, we are continuing to inform and make sure stakeholders understand the decision and resolution that was made. So that's one part of the objective. Number 2, engage the community members and listen and ask a key set of questions that you'll see on the next slide. And then later to come will be develop action plans. And so that's the objective in kind of this next phase, and you'll see it broken out in some steps in the next couple slides. Measurement, check for awareness. Lisa says this a lot. Make sure that our stakeholders, they may not agree, but they understand the problem or the challenge that we're seeking to achieve or a result around. And so that's one of them. But the other is measurement that we're listening, and so confirming that we're listening and gathering feedback and insights. That one's a little softer, but I think an important measurement that we wanted to highlight. There's a lot of actions on how we are seeking this engagement, and Mo, if you go to the next slide for me. There's multiple touch points and a lot of work that's occurring now, and sometimes I think timing is everything. So one item just this week is LB 1024, which appropriates a couple $100 million for development, redevelopment in North and South Omaha, and there's 4 hearings this week. So our team is attending all of those. We've been engaged in that topic for quite some time, and on some of the kind of advisory committees from some of the folks on my team as well. So that's a really great opportunity to listen and hear about thoughts and interests by our North and South Omaha community. So excited about that occurring this week, and then just the various folks that we want to engage with. And the topics evolve quickly. We've had some conversations with some of our elected officials that are interested in the decision for North Omaha Station, but then other things around safety. We've spent time talking about streetlights, for example, or restoration of storms, those kinds of things. So it's also been a good conversation piece to talk about many of the great things that the district has going on. Next slide, please, Mo. So to go a little bit further, what are the kinds of things we're asking about? One is to confirm understanding around the decision and resolution for North Omaha Station. And then what questions or concerns are you hearing from your employees, stakeholders, friends, neighbors? who else should we talk to? This one's been really great. Lisa and I have been adding to our list even this morning of folks that we're getting feedback and insight from. So definitely want some engagement from the board on this, and Lisa has a slide to wrap us up. We'll speak to that. Then talk about what specific things we can continue to do in North Omaha. And then how does the public look at outcomes or what success might look like? And so those are very kind of open-ended, but I think they're really strong research questions to understand where our stakeholders are at. Kate, I went kind of quick. I apologize. I think I was supposed to stop on the last slide if you had some updates.
You're doing, no, thank you. You're covering it really well. You know, I think from a communications perspective, this is the first step, right? We have to understand where each of our audiences are and what they understand, what's unique about their understanding or their concerns. And then we build our communication strategy from there. So what the informational sources or tools or tactics might look like should be based on, exactly where each audience is and what they need to know and how they might best connect. So you'll see throughout when we talk about just specific communication strategies or tactics, there's many different, tactics that might be listed because we want to make sure that we're really tailoring it for each of those audiences that we're trying to reach. So what that might look like when we're engaging our employees is certainly going to be different than, when we're in very specific communities, et cetera. So just to say that we'll make sure that we have a full arsenal of communication kind of tactics and tools, but we want to make sure it's very focused on aiding, understanding, and making people feel as though we're engaging them in the way that they want and need to be engaged.
Thanks, Kate. Next slide, please. So I love a schedule. Here's the schedule. Here's what we're thinking about. And I'll pause too for questions and comments. I know the PI committee had a good discussion around this, but really phase one was up until the August resolution, and now we're in phase two, to consult, to listen, to understand how the community and leaders think and understand the decision that we're working towards. Lots of tactics, data collection, listening tour, even connecting with our employees. So next week we have a meeting with our employees that live around the station and parts of our various communities to give feedback and insight. That was something that has served us well from previous engagement, so I look forward to that. I mentioned the LD 1024 hearings this week. Then also want to make sure that we have community conversations. So we've held some time for some leaders if they have interest in connecting with us and brainstorming or even seeing the North Omaha facility. So trying to be mindful in that. And we had a lot of discussion around, there's a lot of messages here and to get to a lot of folks and listen. And so that's why you see this time frame really going through December. And then we'll report each month going forward. And so we'll have a report next month and November and then December. As we close in and end of November and December, we'll have much more that I'm anxious to hear about what phase three will look like of really what did we hear and what actions can we take that'll be further. So that's kind of the steps, the plan to date. Lisa, I'll turn it back to you and Chair Mulhoff.
Thank you so much. At the top, you'll probably see a graphic. Director Kavanaugh will probably be the only one that will possibly remember this, but when we built the stakeholder process, it was all about planning. What's your actions going to be and how do you measure? And you'll see that is going to happen multiple times. So with this engagement, we are going to be coming back to you each month of who did we talk to, what did we hear from them, and what are their concerns, what changes would they like to see? And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of different, like streetlights, what's going on with streetlights from a safety standpoint. So I think the timing, as Tim said, this is a really good time to do this so that we can go on a listening tour. And next month, you're also here with SB 13. We're breaking it out between formal with IAP2, and then there's so much informal stakeholder, just like going to various meetings, going to events in the evening. Javier going to every single county, Director Yoder and the other directors going to events and meetings. So the informal is probably just as important as the formal. So I'm going to pause there for any questions, and then we'll just talk through some of the questions that we're going to ask. And Director Yoder, we are going to weave in the concerns with emissions at the plant and what do they know and what don't they know, and during this listening tour. So I'm going to pause there.
My camera off, but I gave you a couple of thumbs up.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'll remember that next month, Director Yoder, for SD13.
I'll hop in with a question. And maybe this is to be determined based on your conversations with us, I think the next line. But I'm kind of wondering how the balance of the work that you have ahead and the development of the plan is the role and responsibility of OPPD versus something that is sort of a shared responsibility based on, key partners. We talked about educational and public health, and I don't remember what they were, but like, how do you see these first couple phases getting balanced? I mean, we can't talk about what the action plan implementation looks like because we don't know what it is, but the development of the plan, how do you see those being balanced?
I thought maybe you may have been sitting in on our team meetings on that, because this one was not part of our original stakeholder processes. So this is emerging work on top of that. But we think that this is going to be really a stepping stone for so much more that we can be doing in the communities and our focus areas. So part of the listening, we got to listen first, and then we'll build the plans. We're going to ask the North Omaha community with key leaders of who should be at the table, that we can have that conversation in healthcare. Who do they go to? Who do the constituents go to? And then we'll know a little bit more about where we need to tailor it even more. And that's why we said we appreciate the grace. We know that this is we know we want to move faster and want to do that, but this first phase, I think, is the time that we need to take. Then we can develop the plan and implement it on top of that, and then determine the resources, right? What is it that we're going to change? What could we build in those communities?
And Director Modi, if I may, I think that's a great question, and one that I've asked myself, and I've asked Lisa and her team quite a bit. And I would add to what Lisa just answered. It's very clearly understanding and acknowledging that there are many actions that will fall on us, that we have the responsibility, we have the statutory ability to address and have actions directly assigned to us. But probably the most important piece is understanding the catalyst role that we play in this engagement, right? That not every action is going to be within our purview, or statutorily we may not be able to do everything, but that we do play an important role in bringing people to the table and playing that role of catalyst for change. So I think that's going to be important how we present this back to the board and say, well, these are actions that we are taking ourselves, and these are actions that we believe are coming as a result of this engagement process, but that it's not OPPD alone that will be able to take these actions. So I think it's going to be a combination of both. I'm excited about this because it's truly in the spirit of public power, OPPD being a catalyst for that convention of different minds and perspectives.
Great.
And Javier, could I add on to that? Lori Zagurski and Jamie Wagner, the team has just done phenomenal work. And like I said, you'll see that as our maturity model. But for instance, we've been partnering with Habitat for Humanity and in the various communities. So those are key partners. And we're heading next weekend to Bellevue for Rock the Block. So it's figuring out who can we partner with and how can we make the biggest impact. Right? We're starting small steps now, but this is going to be evolving into something so much bigger than we had ever imagined. So that's the part we're excited about because it's helping us grow as an organization as well.
Now, let me layer another important piece here. On Thursday, I'm going to start talking, it's not the full-on presentation, but on Thursday at the board meeting, during my president's report, I'm going to talk about the Powering the Future to 2050 and the stakeholder engagement process. This is something that we planned to do earlier this year, and for a number of reasons I'll discuss on Thursday, we've delayed that process a little bit, but this is happening, right? So the community engagement that we're having right now under the North Omaha resolution it's happening at the same time as we are also going to be talking to stakeholders about our Powering the Future to 2050, which has a key component, a key element, and there is a cleaner world, right? So I think the stage is set really well for us to have robust conversations under a very solid framework that is Powering the Future of 2050, our vision, and how do we use that vision to bring people to the table and really dream about what is the art of the possible? How could we continue to improve the lives of those who live in our communities?
Oh, that's why we get excited every day. So greatly appreciate it. And you may have heard the work that we had done a few years back, but we went out to our customers through our power panel and asked them what are the types of things we need to be involved in and what shouldn't we be involved in. Education was part of it, of course, basic needs, and then community and environmental betterment. And those are broad strokes. So now we can delve down even further. So the slide we're on right now is, what do we need from you? We really want to have those one-on-ones, and I'll work with Scott and Mo. So what does success look like for you so that we can set expectations? And expectations around the plans for the resolution. As I said, that could mean something different to everybody. How will the board engage with their constituents, your constituents, and support the OPPD efforts? We're bringing you further into this engagement than ever before. And then any other key context that you recommend that we can connect with. So those will be the main portions of our engagement with the board first, and then we're starting our outreach to the community, and then our commitment is that we will come back to you at each board committee meeting for PI, as well as the board if that's what Chair Mulhoff would like us to do, and we will begin our journey. So back to you, Director Mulhoff.
All right, thank you. I'm looking for hands raised. Any? Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, thanks very much. Following on the discussion we had in August, I'm really glad to see the expanded engagement we have, particularly with people who will be most impacted by the recommended and approved continued operations at North Omaha Station. That was very important to me to be included in the resolution, again, as the director representing the area where the station is located and where those residents live. So I look forward to being involved, look forward to the one-on-one meeting. I have a list of some people who have expressed interest in specifically being involved in this process already, and some organizations who have relevant work experience and community engagement related to both environmental and health impacts across both North and South Omaha and across our entire community. So I appreciate you making this available, providing some guidance now on what we should expect over the next few weeks and months. And then the transparency on how this will be provided back to the board and to the public in the future. So again, thanks very much for setting up this ongoing and expanded engagement process as a response and an extension of what we talked about in August on the short timeline for approving the operational part of the process, which we did last month. So again, appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to being involved in the near future. Thanks.
Thank you for those kind words, and the team is listening as well. So thank you for those words of encouragement.
So, and I appreciate Javier's comments about being a catalyst, and your comments about being a catalyst for change in our underserved communities, and certainly look forward to the next few months and making sure that we keep this in the forefront, because that's what we promised the community we would do when we were taking public comments. So reestablishing that trust that Preston Love so eloquently said had been lost. So thank you for this work. And my direction to the team was basically don't take too long before developing that action plan, because we often talk too much and take action too late. So thank you for the work, and I appreciate it, and we'll look forward to hearing from you in the months ahead.
Great. Thank you so much.
That ends my report. Thank you.
Next up, we have other business. So we'll move on to the confirmation of board work meeting agenda. Excuse me, board meeting agenda. So we talked about most of these items today. And is there a request from any board members to pull off any of the consent items to discussion? Director Williams?
Yeah, I would like, I guess, both SD9 and SD7 to be on the action item list, if that's agreeable to you.
Absolutely. Any other items? All right. So we'll move items 12 and 13 to discussion action. We will move on to our next agenda item, which was review of the board work plan. But I don't think we actually had anything new that came onto the parking lot this month. So then we can move now to the Power with Purpose, solar, natural gas, and transmission update. Mr. Bai.
Thank you very much. Brad and I have some of our folks here today to kind of walk through an update on progress. Got some good things to share, seeing some activity, in these realms. So I'll turn it over to the team now to let them give the update.
Yeah, good afternoon. Megan Walker with Construction Management within our Utility Operations Group. And I'll start off our update with Standing Bear Lake Station. If you can go to the next slide, Mo. Maybe the next couple. Yeah, there you go. One more. All right, thank you. For our Standing Bear Lake Station, we have site completion anticipated as January 8th of 2024. As a reminder, last month, I think we indicated it would be in the January timeframe. So this is some specificity on when completion is anticipated. What we mean by completion is that construction activities would be complete, commissioning would be complete, and the unit would be available to be placed on the SPP grid pending any GIA approvals and application. GIA meaning the Generation Interconnection Application Agreements with SPP. For construction activities at the site, from a substation perspective, they've been working on the grounding and drilled piers. As far as generation, there's a lot of focus going on for underground piping, duct banks, and foundation work. The picture at the upper right-hand corner is an image really of the engine hall area, kind of looking west at the site towards 120th. What you see there is some seal slabs for future engines with what will be in the engine hall footprint. Additionally, MUD or Metropolitan Utility District is continuing their gas pipeline installation at the site, and that is continuing to go very well. This project did meet a major milestone this morning with the completion of our 9th Wardzilla engine being delivered to Standing Bear Lake in the early morning hours. And so I really wanted to give kudos for the Wardzilla and their heavy haul team, as well as support from many employees from our Elkhorn Service Center with the coordination of having those engines come onto the site and use of the rail at our OPPD facility, and then support of from our linemen, as well as many of our outreach team for communicating those move ahead of time and answering any questions that had come up. So the picture on the bottom left is a picture of the engine being moved at our Elkhorn Service Center from the rail onto the heavy haul trailer. And then the one right next to it is a picture of the first engine leaving the Elkhorn Service Center on the heavy haul trailer. That road up there is roughly 180th and Dodge Street. And then on the right-hand side, we just kind of have some fun facts about both the engine and then the engine and trailer combined. So the overall trailer was 248 feet roughly. With the engine on it, it was 18 feet 7 inches. And then their combined weight was 796,000 pounds. So really a great milestone. All engines are now at the Standing Bear Lake site, and things went really smoothly. So that's a great milestone for the project. I can go into the next slide for Turtle Creek Station. Similarly, site completion for Turtle Creek is anticipated for January 26th of 2024. Like St. Amber Lake, the construction activities are similar. We have in the substation area grounding work and drilled piers. In the generation area, there's a lot of work for underground piping and duct banks and foundation work. What you see below in the two images, the one on the bottom left, is the gas turbine area and piping that's being installed to support that. And then on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see installation of a conduit duct bank at the site. So you see some piping and conduit there. And then from a gas supply perspective, Northern Natural Gas is installing the gas pipeline and infrastructure, and they've made quite a bit significant progress there. And for major equipment deliveries, from a Siemens perspective, we are anticipating those to come later this fall, with the first combustion turbine and generator anticipated at the site between mid and late October. And I'll just pause to see if there's any questions before I turn over to Courtney for a solar update.
And just a reminder, Megan, thank you for that. The engines that we've talked about recently, about moving those engines to the Standing Bear Lake Station, those are 9 Wärtsilä engines. They're smaller in size and capability. The 2 that Megan just talked about are much larger. They're combustion turbines of much larger capacity and size. So, but they're only 2, but much bigger and probably more complicated to move, and the logistics associated are going to be different than the ones that we just saw moving here in the past few days.
This is Troy. I put in the chat, this has been an effort that's gone across OPPD, utility operations, supply chain, customer, just really fabulous collaboration in that space. And I do want to call out, Megan and Matt specifically for their work with our contractor and helping to find solutions for supply chain issues and all kinds of wonderful stuff during the environment we're in now as we're building new assets. So that team has performed exceptionally well in that space, and it's really kind of shown up in schedule in the way that this is moving along pretty well considering the challenges in the market space. So thank you.
Roy, thank you for bringing that up, because oftentimes at these committee meetings and when we interact with the board, we talk a lot about planning. We talk about the future, what we want to see, what board members want to see, and that's a great conversation. I think this is one where I want to make sure that we highlight the importance of world-class execution. And we are executing projects, we are meeting schedules, we are doing a lot of really, really good work in addition to planning for that future, right? So this is a great opportunity for us to pause and thank Megan and Matt and many people who are for executing on those plans that started as plans 3 years ago, started with drawings on whiteboards, and now we see that happening, the physical work happening. So thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll turn it over to Courtney.
Do a quick sound check here. Great. All right, thanks, Megan. Good afternoon. Courtney Kennedy with Alternative Energy. Excited to give a solar update today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Mo, if we can move to the next slide, please. And just for the board and the audience, we have a handful of slides on a variety of topics, so my plan is to kind of move through and then pause at the end for questions. So first off, we talked a lot last month about Platteview. Platteview Solar continues to make progress, really having some completed activities around coordination with permitting in the county. But right now we're excited to really be moving on procurement of major equipment. That started and takes some time, but that continues to make progress. We're working on design packages, pollinator cover plans. And so a lot of that work is really being done by AES, who is our PPA partner, but also in parallel, the OPPD team, a lot of utility operations engineering, is working on the substation design package. So a lot of coordination between those two groups. And then finally, as always, community coordination. So making sure county officials are updated on the project process, as well as continuing to bring that to the community. All right, next slide, please. So next we'll jump into some federal policy updates. There's been a lot of movement here in the last month since we last talked about solar. The first one is really around anti-circumvention and the investigation that's been ongoing. So this is something we started talking about back in March when the Department of Commerce announced the investigation. And at that time, they were planning to have kind of their recommendation or their preliminary determination by the end of August. So we have passed that, and right before that deadline, the Department of Commerce did push that decision through November, late November of this year. So we're kind of in a space again of waiting to see what that determination will look like. And again, this was the preliminary determination, which will actually push the deadline for the final determination, which really gets into specifics around levels of tariffs, things like that, into next spring. So, what are the impacts of this push? It just is longer timeline of uncertainty around the panels that were being investigated. If you remember back to June, we talked about Biden having an executive order which pushed any new tariffs for 2 years out. And so we are seeing that did bring some relief to supply, but there's still a lot going on in the market in terms of other considerations for the tariffs that are really there to prevent forced labor and buying equipment that uses forced labor. So in general, we're hearing from suppliers that things are moving, but this definitely is a delay and sort of a next piece of certainty on any additional tariffs. And just to kind of understand, I think we've talked a lot the last few months about impacts to the industry, specifically in 2022. Wood Mackenzie, who's a research group in the industry, has predicted about a 6.3 gigawatt reduction in installations this year just because of this anti-circumvention investigation. So it's really had an impact on the rollout of solar projects. But we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about some good news. So the other big major policy update on the federal side is the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, which I think was actually signed into law maybe during the last committee meeting. So this is really exciting for the industry, exciting for public power. There's things in here that public power has been pushing for many, many years. So there's a lot here, but there's a lot for us to still understand and review and figure out what impacts our projects and our plans. A couple of the things to highlight that OPPD is really trying to dig our hands into and understand for solar specifically is the extension and expansion of both investment tax credits and production tax credits, not only for solar, but other energy technologies. The other major one is the direct pay, which allows a public entity like OPPD or other public power to be eligible for these tax credits. And historically, this has been a challenge for public power. So these are two really exciting things. They're relevant to power with purpose, but we have some more work really to understand as OPPD and as an industry for how these will impact our projects. So in terms of next steps, a lot of these programs and rules will fall to the Department of Treasury and the IRS. And these groups are still figuring out the process and the details for implementation. And we've been told that'll take several more weeks. So there's still some details that we need to iron out and understand. OPPD has engaged industry expertise from legal to financial. We're active in industry groups like LPPC, APPA, Smart Electric Power Association, and others. And we're talking to our suppliers to really understand what does this mean for timeline? What does this mean for how we roll out remaining solar projects, but also any future projects? So really in the space of getting into the details and hope to bring back more information in the coming months. The next slide is really in here for the board and for the public. I don't plan to go through this today just because of time, but this is a summary of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so it highlights a lot of the items that are exciting for OPPD and for others in the industry. So just want to make sure that I call that out. All right, next we'll transition out of the federal policy Mo, if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about local advocacy and education. So we've talked about the federal landscape and continuing to adjust and learn through that, but there's still a lot of work that we're doing locally with our counties, our cities, and our customers to make sure we're moving progress here as well. So ongoing supportive regulations for city and county jurisdictions. This is something we talk about very regularly. We talked about it earlier today in SD9. There's a lot of work being done in our various counties to make sure regulations consider, how to roll out these projects, to make sure that county commissioners, county leaders understand the technology, are able to ask their questions, to help them understand these projects. And so there's a lot of effort going in there. The other thing we've been doing is developing education materials. There's a lot of great information on the internet, and there's a lot of not great information on the internet. And so we've been working to really develop what's called Solar 101, which includes kind of a technology overview, utility scale solar development process steps, timelines, even what to expect at the end of life. And so we've been working on solar. We know there's other topics such as when you integrate battery and other technologies, but this is really to allow OPPD to be out there talking with customers and other officials about these projects. Some of this, I shared last month from the solar technology. And if we go to the next slide, just wanted to kind of highlight some of the process steps that we're taking out and talking in counties right now. So these next slides are really about the timeline for developing solar. A lot of the feedback we get, out in communities is, hey, I didn't know this was going on. How does this work? When we look at utility scale solar and often other projects, these are very long lead times in terms of how you develop a project. There's a lot that goes in behind the scenes before this ever may show up at a board meeting. And so this graphic is really trying to highlight the site development, which takes many years. This can be done by private developers. It can be done by utilities. There's site selection based on topography, based on wetlands. There's land agreements that have to be put into place. There's interconnection studies that get done, permitting, all of those steps. And that has to happen really to even have a viable project. So that takes several years. Then you have the contracting and the design. So this is where you may see a request for proposal, where there's negotiations with contractors, purchasing of major equipment. That takes time. And so all of this stuff has to be done before you ever see equipment on the site. And then you have construction, which we talked a lot about in this meeting last month about what to expect for solar construction. And then there's the operation. The operation of these facilities can be up to 35 years. The expected life, both financially and for design, is anywhere from 30 to 35 years. That doesn't mean there isn't activity at the site during that time. So there's maintenance, there's performance monitoring. We talked a lot about asset management earlier. There are principles that have to be done for solar sites. And there are equipment upgrades, just like we do on other generation plants. So this is an important factor of really understanding that these facilities will be operational for several years. And then Mo, if you go to the next slide, the last piece is really around the decommissioning process. And so there are policies in place many times with the counties in contracts of how the site gets decommissioned and then restored back to what it was or better. So really what we've been trying to do is to walk through these various steps, who's the player or the players in each step of the process and what to expect, whether you're a customer, whether you're a stakeholder or an elected official. The next slide will go to one more here just on some of the education content is really around all the regulatory approvals. So we've talked about many of these, but when we go out and talk to the community or others about what this takes, there's many steps. So there's interconnection, which we've talked a lot about. That's a federal process. We have state requirements, whether it's with the Power Review Board or others. And we have the county or the city jurisdictions that we must work with on conditional use permits, decommissioning, building permits, etc. So there's a lot of players in this space to make sure that these projects are done the right way with all of these regulatory approvals. So kind of wrapping up here, again, a lot of content being developed to be out in the communities to talk about how this process works, to bring people along. If we go to the last slide, I'll kind of wrap with what are we doing to continue deploying solar. So as we continue to monitor federal changes, we monitor what's going on with supply chain, how to get equipment, and we're out talking to the community. These are all efforts to continue to deploy solar projects. We've talked about the importance of this. We saw that in the SD9 update. Solar is part of the solution. It's needed. It's on peak energy. It is part of us to grow into the future. And so we have to, really be clear about that message when we're out talking with our communities and our customers. This all allows us to continue to study sites, develop risk strategies or risk mitigation strategies to deploy solar. In the background, we also have significant engagement with suppliers. This is helping us maintain key relationships with developers, with equipment suppliers, so that we're ready when we're ready to go back to the market. We have those relationships in place. They help us understand the volatile solar market. They're also trying to contemplate the IRA and what that'll do to their projects that they bring to us. And it ultimately helps us stay up to date on projects that they have in development. So like I shared 2 slides ago, developers have projects they've had in Nebraska for several years. They're continuing to push those forward. So it's really important that we stay up to date with these as we look for sites. The last thing I'll say,
Courtney, if I may just interject really quickly here. One thing that is very clear to me today, and something that Courtney and her team and many others have helped share that information with me, and I think with others in the executive team, is that when it comes to solar procurement, one size definitely does not fit all, right? As you all may remember, about over 2 years ago, we issued a very large request for proposals. It was large. We try to encompass the entire state, beyond our service territory, and we got really good information from there. But what we have learned so far, and this is what Courtney has been sharing in the past few minutes, tells me that a large RFP similar to what we did 2.5 years ago is not the route to go. We're very, very precisely looking at opportunities for where there is good interconnection potential, where there is site advantages, when there's an existing relationships, etc. So we're actively pursuing utility scale solar, and I want the board and I want the public to understand this very clearly. We continue to pursue these as hard as we have ever done it. Even if you don't see a massive request for proposal out on the street, it doesn't mean that we're not pursuing these. We're using a different procurement sourcing strategy that is still looking at very clearly putting the 600 megawatts of solar that the board approved us to put in 2019. 519, because we have 81 already going in on Plat View Solar, so we have 519 to go. Back to you, Courtney.
yeah, thank you for adding that, Javier. I think that really highlights the importance of these engagements and relationships we have with suppliers. To Javier's point, they help us kind of understand how do we compete in such a competitive market. What's the right time to go back to the market? How do we just think about working through some of the challenges we've been dealing with since that original RFP in 2019? So again, doing a lot to deploy solar, even if it doesn't always appear that way. I think the last thing I'll end on, more of an awareness item, but OPPD did submit an application to the Nebraska Environmental Trust to their annual grant process earlier this month. This was an application to study the feasibility of solar on the closed landfill in Douglas County. This is a project that sort of came about through discussion, through partnership with Douglas County, who is excited for this pursuit. This won't be announced until next spring, and so there's not a lot of activity happening right now. But if recommended, OPPD and Douglas County would then collaborate on potential next steps. And so this is just an example of an opportunity that came about in partnership with one of our counties. And I think we continue to look at how do we partner with our counties, our cities, to deploy solar as Javier sort of aligned, the 519 that we need to get. So with that, that is what I have for the solar content. So I'll go ahead and pause if there's any questions before I hand it over to Tim O'Brien.
Where is the closed landfill? That's not Elk City. That's currently in use, I believe, right?
I'm sorry, I blipped out there for a second.
No, I was wondering where the actual location of the closed landfill site. That's not Elk City, correct?
Yes, I think we can jump with the address. Tim, do you have that off the phone?
Yeah, Mike, it's Director Kavanaugh. It's near 120th and State-ish, just for directional purposes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
So if we don't receive the grant for that study, is that something that we would be interested in finding alternative ways to pay to have that study completed, or is it only if we get the grant?
Yeah, I think at this point we're looking forward to seeing if the grant is an opportunity. You know, we've talked about different site opportunities throughout the service territory, and so I think there's a desire, you know, beyond sort of the projects that we have prioritized to deploy solar, to understand those. So I think there's still some analysis and consideration for where we go after that decision.
I don't see any other hands right now. Directors, any questions? Oh, Director Williams, there you are.
Yep, perfect. Can we talk about the magnitude of the solar on the landfill site? Is that something that was included in the grant application, or do we have a rough idea? Is this 1, 2, 5, 10, 100 megawatts? What is generally the scope that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's probably somewhere in the plus or minus 10 megawatts. So it's not a large site, but that would be part of the feasibility that would need to be done.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tim, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Courtney. Just a couple slides to round us out. Many of these topics have been covered on some of the other aspects, but wanted to highlight a couple points to the board and to the public watching. We're continuing our updates on our Community Connect website. We had really tremendous coverage of the Standing Bear Lake Station and engine moves and some of the things that are going on for that facility. And so there's a lot of activity on social media that we're proud of, that the public and our stakeholders were interested in that really complex movement. And then also continuing monthly updates. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, this is a screenshot from OPPD Community Connect on kind of the status of the moves, and just more sort of blog style, a little bit about the projects that we're continuing. So I wanted to highlight there. Last slide, Mo. So then similarly, on the solar side, Courtney covered a lot of the material that's coming or in process. So I don't have a lot more remarks on this one. It's just another continued effort to continue the story, the education, and a lot of the one-on-ones or small group meetings with elected officials or decision makers, and just helping understand the life cycle of solar. And so hopefully that volume of information that we provided to the board and to the public is helpful. And now we're taking it out to many of the folks in the public as well. So Courtney, that concludes the little bit that I had to close us up on outreach.
All right, I don't see any hands for questions. Are there any questions from the board? Thank you very much, Tim. All right, next item on our agenda here is the customer engagement for future strategic initiative update. Mr. McAreevy.
Thank you, Chair Bogner. I will be brief in my opening comments that when our formal strategic initiatives were formed, a commitment to the board was made to give periodic updates. So this will be your periodic update, or one of them, on our customer engagement for the future strategic initiatives. So this is informational for the board today. There are no decisions or action points. In particular, what you'll hear is some culmination of a phase of the work around defining what the future will look like. So we're not into the execution phase yet, but just a great number of people across all facets of the organization have been involved to help define what we'd like the future to look like, and as it relates to customer engagement. So I just want to thank each and every one of those for the passion and commitment that they've put into this work thus far. And we have a few team members on the call listening today, but I want to turn it over to Heather Siepken, our Director of Product Development and Marketing, to lead us through the update. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Sound check as well. Make sure, can everyone hear me? All right, I see some thumbs up. Well, good afternoon. And again, thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on what's happening with the customer engagement strategic initiative. The presentation is quite brief, so I'll ask the same as you heard with Courtney, is we'll just work through these slides and probably just hold any questions and comments until the end, if you don't mind. To start, I do have a couple of slides and comments just to really help us build out some context and provide some reminders. The project has been going for just over 18 months now, and so sometimes we just have to remind ourselves of where we started and the goals and objectives of the initiative. So to start, as a reminder, customer engagement, it's about the ongoing relationship beyond the customer's service touch point or experience with our organization. It's really defined, remember, as that direct and indirect interaction with our brand over time. So again, this can be, you know, before or during one of those transactions, whether that's phone, online, email. It could be in-person interactions that we're having at certain events. It could also be through social media or even through potential like review sites. So really through engagement, brands like ours can reach out to customers to whether, you know, to inspire purchases, build brand recognition, solicit feedback, gather information, and really, again, the idea here is to build ongoing dialogue with our customers that creates an emotional attachment, and you'll hear me refer to that later. Mo, if you want to go to the next slide. Again, just a reminder, advocacy, as you've heard kind of like that context of don't forget what customer engagement is. Advocacy is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to achieve. So this strategic initiative is set up to create the platform and the recommendations for us to get there. But advocacy in itself can take quite a bit of time for an organization to see its customers, I guess I'll say, behave in such manner. So think of it as like advocacy is the top of a maturity model. So typically you're starting with just like simple brand awareness. You recognize the brand, the corporation, the organization. It moves into more of like the customer's more educated about you, and then you develop a relationship. But a relationship doesn't necessarily mean that you have advocacy, and that's what customer engagement's about. And so that's the final cherry on top, is to really have those customers become self-served advocates for our brand, and that's what we'll be trying to achieve as a result. On the next slide, this is just a summary again of today's presentation. Is really a summary of the work that's been completed over these two phases that you see here in a black box. So first, the team did complete what is called Scan the Environment, which really, as it states, is just a catalog of all of our current state items, how we're operating today, what information do we have, what are our current state processes, but also taking the time to explore how other utilities are approaching customer engagement and how other best-in-class organizations are achieving customer engagement with their customers. And I think it's important to understand that because customers aren't usually comparing us against another utility. Rather, they're comparing us against interactions that they're having day in and day out with other organizations, right? So our research really needed to understand the bar that those organizations are setting. The team also completed that next phase there, as you see in the box, which is define the future. And this is incredibly important. So I'm just going to say this as we move forward in today's presentation, is that what define the future is and is not. So define the future was really the team coming up with like a list of recommendations on what they feel OPPD should pursue in the future. But what it is not is the how, when, how much, with who, or where. And that's really something that you see that's outside of the black box listed there under resource and roadmap. And so that's kind of the next step. So today's presentation, I like to say, is kind of like a blueprint of our future, but we don't necessarily know all of the exact details of how to bring that blueprint forward to execution, at least not as a part of this presentation today. We will talk about that at the close of the presentation and when you can kind of expect to see some of those conversations to occur and those decisions to be made. And we'll say this presentation is also being delivered a little bit in arrears. Oddly enough, this was actually first planned to come to you in June, and through movements and schedules being or agendas being full, here we are in September. So believe it or not, the team is actually closing on phase 4, resource and roadmap, this month. It's I will say nearly final, other than maybe just like formatting. And so we are already, we actually just kicked off the next phase of phase 5 develop about 3 weeks ago. So just so you kind of know where we are with the project as a whole versus maybe what this presentation is recapping for you today. All right, so let's get into the meat of the presentation. So Mo, if you want to go to the next slide, let's recap a little bit about Scan the Environment and who was the environment. And I'm just going to say it was a lot. This slide is not an all-inclusive. If I tried to put all the logos and brands onto one slide, I'd need probably a 45-page deck of logos. Like, it was a lot. We dug deep. It is just meant to show that there is a sampling that we did study, but I also want it to show that we studied not only utilities, we studied best-in-class experts, as I alluded to earlier, and then we also looked at some what I'll just kind of call other industry experts, as you kind of see over there, youth.gov, Gartner, and make sure that we talk to some professionals about how they're supporting brands with their customer engagement goals. We attended conferences, we had phone calls with these organizations, we read white papers, we sent surveys, really kind of unlimited to how we went about gathering our data to really help us decide, again, how do we want to define the future here for what makes sense at OPPD. I think the most important learning here, and it's really consistent among all of the brands that we spoke to, and including those experts, is that engagement takes time. It's just not an immediate reaction. You can't just have a strategic initiative and expect there to be full engagement as a result of 18 months or 2 years worth of work. Even brands, really top noted brands that excel in customer engagement, and I'm thinking like, Apple and Patagonia, while relatively well known, they actually spent years investing in their customer advocacy before they got there. So, the biggest learning, and I think we all know this, but it was important to validate, is that a relationship needs to be nurtured through time. And this is, again, why we're putting this kind of concerted focus into this initiative here at OPPD today, is that we want to know years from now, regardless of what the environment brings us, the market brings us, that we've deepened our relationships with a customer to such a level that we have advocates out of them. All right, so scan the environment. What did we study? Well, we explored broadly, as that previous slide. Sorry, Mo, you can go to the next page. Sometimes I forget that I'm not the one clicking. So while we explored broadly, we also explored deeply. And so you might recall from a past presentation that the strategic initiative was broken into 3 different teams for respective areas of study. And so those are listed here. You can see the organizational readiness, advanced analytics and tools, and then the customer insights and outputs. And so organizational readiness, really they focused on governance and people. Advanced analytics and tools studied technologies, both customer-facing and back office, as well as utilizing data for insights and decision-making and company-wide metrics. And then our insights and outputs team studied enhanced ways to collect those insights, to organize those insights, and gathering feedback and engaging with them maybe differently than we do today, and also studying how to better personalize our messaging and individualizing our interactions with them. So our journey, Mo, on the next slide, it's been long. That was kind of the scan the environment. It was probably the largest phase of work that we had. It was, like I said, it's just really important to understand, what are the benchmarks, what are the hallmarks of really being successful at this. And so I just will say, that phase alone, combined with Define the Future, really what we're talking about in this presentation today was about 18 months in time. And so this slide here provides some numbers. At this point in time, I'm not even sure they're exact numbers as they were at one point in time, but I think that it's just it's simply setting out to show that, that research and studying took us through a number of different companies, workshops, explorations. Honestly, we generated over 100 different engagement ideas. I think my favorite noted here was the PowerPoint slides for the OPPD historians to manage into the future, because there is a whole load of them. The journey here really doesn't represent the hours or work dedicated just through, through thorough research analysis and formation of solutions. It's hard to really pack that into a presentation, let alone a slide. But there, I just again want to assure, to our board, to our, to the public and to our employees across the district that, a lot of very thoughtful work has gone into the recommendations. And I just want to take this opportunity, as I always do. I know I'm the one that gets to be the quote unquote on stage presenting, but again, there is, about 50 to 60 individuals of employees really that have spent a lot of time with this project and with me over the last couple of years, and it's important to recognize them as well. And someday we will actually recognize them when we get to celebrate. All right, so let's talk about defining the future. Mo, if you want to move to the next slide, as we transition here into this segment or this phase of work that the team did, we're going to start with the most important foundational area. And so these are moments that matter. These are transformative moments in time or interactions between OPPD and our customers. And they're important points in the customer journey in which we know we have the opportunity to make a lasting emotional connection or impression on how somebody feels about our brand and our relationship with them. There were dozens of moments that were studied and that we could have chosen from, but this again is the recommendation of the team moving forward, is to focus on these 15 to really get us started. We feel that these are the ones that are going to have the highest amount of impact and are the most realistic and feasible based on some of the current state observations of the organization. So as the relationship between OPPD and its customers is mostly transactional today, the unexpected and delightful nature of a moment that matter can really transform a customer from just a satisfied customer into a brand advocate. And these 15 provide the biggest area of opportunity there. Behind each of these moments that matter on the next page, sorry, Mo, are dozens of individual engagement tactics. So really, this was the big reveal of the initiative as a whole, was the recommended list of nearly 150 ways to engage with our customers. Again, this list is meant to be too much to read on a PowerPoint slide. In fact, it's only illustrative. It is not all encompassing. It does not have all of them. It was really too many to list on one PowerPoint. It also was kind of unnecessary. It's just meant to say that there is a lot of things that we can do, and we want you again to know that. We want the public to know that. I think something important to note here, not all of the engagement recommendations or tactics as they're labeled here are what we would call, again, quote unquote, net new. In fact, some of them are existing tactics that we do today. However, we see an opportunity to keep them, right? Because this initiative is also about saying what we should continue to do. But we may also see an opportunity to scale them. And what I mean by that is scaling them maybe to a new journey point, a new moment that matters. Maybe we're only doing it in a certain journey point, but we have opportunity to expand elsewhere. Or maybe even finding a way to take that tactic to make it more individualized and unique for a specific customer persona or segment. Other ideas that you may see here are completely new ideas in which customers are engaging with other brands in a similar manner that, they trust it, they like it, they want to continue to do that, they want it with us as well. And so we recommend bringing that and utilizing that tactic here within our space, again, to further build our relationship and emotional connection. So again, the win is highly, still being kind of discussed as a part of that roadmap. We know we can't do all of these at once. Many of these are going to take technology and or data. So again, today and in this presentation, I would just say again, we're providing the recommendation of a number of engagement tactics for us to consider in the future. I would also just recognize, sorry, not recommend, but recognize that we do have a very tight relationship with the technology strategic initiative. So again, as we are moving forward with a number of our recommendations, the relationship with that strategic initiative has been incredibly important as we build out that resource and roadmap timeline. All right. So we can move on, continuing on with the recommendations and what we expect to see in the future. We know we're going to need time to deploy a significant number of ideas, especially as the team has already provided close to 150. So as a part of the recommendation coming out of that organizational readiness was a recommendation for governance and structure. And this will be known moving forward as the engagement playbook. And the playbook helps the teams understand what is needed for a tactic to be successful, and then takes it through a methodical process to ensure that the idea is tested and proven before it's fully scaled to other moments, personas, or segments. So again, we talked about those moments that matter, right? And we're talking about individualizing communications and tactics. And so you want to make sure before you just kind of mass market and go to all of them that one, you're using the appropriate tactic with the appropriate person and through the appropriate channel, but that you are testing it and that you're learning from it before you kind of hop, skip, and jump and bring it over there. So that's an important, I guess I'll just say, process enhancement that we would like to, again, recommend to or through the initiative. Additionally, the process ensures that that it has considered, I guess I'll say, the people, the technology, the dependencies, as well as the metrics of success before, again, that we just kind of go out and begin these engagement tactics. All right, so I think an easier way is to probably convey our recommendation through a story. So Mo, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. And you guys know I'm not much of a scripted presenter, but I'm actually, it's a good thing I'm from home. I'm going to pull a script up and I'm going to read a story to you to kind of maybe hopefully bring to light and make it real and as to like what this could look like in the future. So I'm going to talk about a customer we call Average Joe. This is one of our personas. This particular persona is actually probably our least engaged persona today, yet is probably one of our more highly populated personas that exists throughout our district. So if Joe were to tell us a little bit about himself, this is how he would talk. All right, he would say, "I'm a mechanic. My wife, who also works, and I have 2 kids. I was born and raised here in Omaha. Our family is all here or in the surrounding areas. We're your average family. We hang out together, watch TV, and spend time with our friends. I work for a local business, and I like to support other local businesses when I can. We're doing fine. We're on a budget. Sometimes things are tight between kids' activities and the changing hours at work, and everything, quite frankly, is just getting more expensive. Right now, I really just want the cheapest, most reliable power I can afford. Environmental sustainability isn't always on my mind, especially if it costs more given my current situation. I want to provide for my family. Right now, when I think about OPPD, it's all fine. I want my bill to be the same amount every month, and my wife has us on a budget plan after calling the office downtown. We sometimes forget when the new amount will be adjusted for the year, so that can always feel like a surprise because everything just seems to be going up these days. I also know OPPD is public power, so I want to make sure they're not wasting my money. They should be making sure they're helping me save money and not have outages. Tell you what, that polar vortex thing that happened last winter should have never happened. I get it was cold out and everywhere in our area, but how come it took so long to know if I was going to have an outage? Couldn't they just text me, leave me a voicemail, letting me know if we were next and how long it was going to last? We pay a good amount for power. Why should I expect to go through that? I mean, even my dentist texts me when I have a checkup and my bill is due. I don't remember asking for that, but I do appreciate it. That's all I'm asking for, a heads up, so I don't have to ask. So Again, does this sound familiar? I'm going to end there. I could probably go on and on and on and describe Average Joe here, but does he sound familiar, right? Does he sound like maybe one of our customers that has called in or has reached out to you or has posted through social media? And I'm not suggesting Average Joe's making all the right statements, but in his sitting in his living room, this is what he's feeling. He's feeling like he's not being communicated. He's really unsure how we're investing in his funds. He's not really sure what his priority is in terms of how it how it reacts to the utility. And really what I hear is he just wants simplicity, right? I just want it at my fingertips. So tomorrow, as our engagement practices begin to mature, this is how we would hope Joe would maybe be sitting on his couch and talking about OPPD. I like OPPD. For starters, my wife now gets texts about things, which is really helpful. We get reminders when the bill is due, even when our budget plan amount is going to change. That's a huge help. One month we had a question about our bill, and usually my wife would call to figure it out. This time she did the live chat thing on her phone, and she was done in like 5 minutes. They even told us about a new rebate we didn't even know we were eligible for. I always wondered if those live chat things work, but she really seemed to like it and left them a positive review on a survey that popped up after the chat closed. We had a big storm a couple of months ago and lost power. Wasn't super excited about that, but it seems like just a few seconds later, we got a text from OPPD letting us know what happened. A big tree limb fell on a line near us, and that text included a link to an outage map so I could follow the status online. They gave us some updates as the crews were fixing everything and the power was up a half hour before they even expected. I liked knowing they're working hard when the power's out. My wife was so happy she thanked them on Facebook and shared her praises to all of her connections. My kids somehow even knew what the crews were doing. I guess some folks from OPPD have been teaching them about electricity and the power grid at their school, and they told me that the crews were probably out looking at damage. That made me chuckle, coming from my 10-year-old know-it-all. I'm glad they're teaching the kids about power and how OPPD is part of a community. Really good company. She even told me she's thinking about submitting for the Energy Joke of the Week or joining the leadership group there. And it doesn't stop there. The other day we were at a ball tournament and that had a bunch of teams from the area, and in between games there was someone there from OPPD who asked me if I had time for a quick 10-minute chat over a hot dog. I was headed to the concession stand anyway, so we chatted while we waited in line about how things were going and if there was anything in my life that could be easier. They mentioned they would be using these discussions to help build programs that would help me in my future. I walked away with my last bit of hot dog and felt like she really listened to me, and I'm excited to see what's next. So, a bit of a change in tone from me. I get it. I'm the narrator, but what we're hoping that you're seeing is like through simple engagement practices and just making life a little bit easier for our customers, providing opportunities like text messaging at their fingertips, the ability to leave a review or to follow a status online or to understand what's happening with a project. And if I go back to these moments that matter, and again, all those 150 engagement tactics that could be deployed, hopefully we are changing the service touch point and the customer experience, and we are heightening it through our engagement practices again to end with an advocate as a result. And so I'll come down here to now kind of close, and Mo, if you want to go to the next slide to really summarize our recommendation, what we're saying here is that we want to move from our current state of engaging in silos. And I caveat, I'm not talking about internal department silos. In fact, I would advocate that the teams collaborate quite well. But what we have done as an organization is we silo our customer interaction and how we approach them. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there on the left. And I don't know, I'm a little OCD, so I'm just gonna like share, like, I like the left, right? Nice little rows, it's all lined up, pretty little check boxes. But the truth is it needs to be messy, and it needs to be what you see on that right-hand side, right? It really needs to be an interactive web with our customer. And so the recommendation is to treat our interactions with our customers more like an actual campaign where the results from one interaction perhaps triggers another, or the data and insights collected from any given interaction are poured together to inform our strategic decision making in the future. And so that's really what we're saying is a new vision of customer engagement is we're doing a lot of the same things, but we're maybe messing it up a little bit behind the scenes to ensure that we're really thinking about the customer as an individual. All right, and to close, Mo, if you want to go to the next step, really to conclude, what is up next? So I talked earlier, or I mentioned earlier, the team is coming to a close, or darn near buttoning it up on that that roadmap and resource phase. We're also in the early stages of some design and development work. So our completed roadmap will help us identify the approximate timeline, the resources that are needed, the dependencies, the costs, right? Some of that, that in that story, you know, you heard me talk about being able to individually communicate based on an outage. And we all know, and a big topic of conversation here is, you know, we're sort of relying on an AMI project in order for that to happen, right? So again, not all of these are just a turn the key and we can be live. There's a lot of dependencies across the district in order for us to be able to do some of these. And that's not all of them, but that is some of them. And so I would also just say next steps, the engagement project team, like I said, has been working really closely with the technology SI in terms of that roadmap. We've been working incredibly closely with the workforce transformation SI as we recognize that there's, you know, a little bit of a shift in the people in terms of culture and training that needs to occur in order for us to be successful. And so there's a lot of, I'll just say, cross-functional work happening behind the scenes with different departments and bodies of work in order to make this successful. Additionally, something to maybe be excited about, and again, I want the public to hear, is that we are about to start our outreach with our customers. So this is surveys, workshops. We'll have some information on Community Connect. We're going to have some local conversations, like whether it's a hot dog at a ballpark or coffee in a coffee shop. So those are actually in the planning stages as I speak. Most of those kind of going out between the months of October and November. And then additionally, we're going to complete some work, some unfinished work that we have around youth engagement, finalizing our study there. And we're also going to finalize the development of what we've referred to as kind of some no regret work. And so these are items like implementing our voice of the district solution, building a change leadership network. And additionally, like today, right now, we want to use these updated personas to begin tailoring our messages immediately to our customers. So these are some next steps and some progress within the initiative. With that, I come to a close and the rest of the time is yours to ask questions or provide any comments.
Thank you, Heather. I agree with Director Spurgeon's comment in the notes here that your example is very illustrative and I think very much helps us really clearly understand what this will evolve and look like. Are there any questions from my board right now? All right, Director Moody.
Thank you, Director Bogner. Heather, wonderful job as always. You do such a wonderful job when you present, and I really enjoyed it. Couple questions for you. One, pilots. I understand the need for pilots in some cases. I also, you know, am mindful of instances, situations, tactics where we kind of know what's in front of us and we can just roll with it without testing. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the nuance between those two things and maybe give us a sense for, I'm looking in some of the appendix, by the way. Thank you for including the appendix. That's helpful, good details. But looking at, you know, a 3-week time period for sprints is shorter than I was imagining, which I think is great. But talk to me a little bit about that nuance, if you would.
Yeah, I think this is funny because I remember the team having a really deep conversation on the word pilot, right? And me coming from a product development background, what I'll say is like there's a very big difference between a pilot and a soft launch. And so I don't know if I agree with the terminology, but we've bought onto it, right? And so what I will say about a pilot is you're right. Some of these probably need more tried and true testing before they go to market. I think that at the end, everything gets piloted, whether it's piloted for a matter of days or it's piloted for a matter of years, right? And so the goal is, you know, let's just call it a new email campaign. Like we might pilot by simply sending it to a very small persona or segment group, see how the reaction happens over the next 24 hours before we scale. So I definitely don't want anyone to think that pilot means some significant amount of time, but I do think we need to make sure before we would say hit 800 some thousand customers with something that we've been able to somehow test to ensure the effectiveness of it.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Does it also contemplate organizational readiness as we go through some of this, exploring some of these things are going to be new for us as an organization. So is it also inward looking as well?
Yes, it is. And I think if you look at like that diagram, you kind of see the left-hand side has that circle, right? And so, that's really, I'll say in that ideate stage, before we go to pilot, what we're thinking about is, people, technology, dependencies, risks, metrics. I'm doing this off the top of my head, but there's five categories there, and so it's very much people need to be a part of this, and that's. I'll just, I'm speaking from my heart a little bit, but organizational readiness as a work stream was incredibly important to me, and we've been talking about this a little bit internally, and I kind of said, why do strategic initiatives fail? Most of the time, and I'm not going to say always, but most of the time it's because of there's no organizational readiness. You think about the output and the outcome, but you don't think about the soldiers that have to make the output and the outcome become a reality, right? And so whether that is a large scale initiative or that is a small scale marketing campaign, event, or customer engagement tactic, you have to think about the people in order for it to be successful. And so I love the playbook because it really is like, again, it's, it doesn't dictate you must do it this way. There's definitely there's like check boxes and stuff that might take it through ideate quicker, pilot slower, vice versa, but it gives the governance to ensure that we've really thought through something before we're just out there interacting with our customers.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Fully support. Well done. Very exciting. I'll pass.
Director Mulhoff.
So thank you so much, Heather. This was a great presentation. And, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the outreach we're doing in North Omaha, and certainly on a smaller scale, it uses the same principles. And, I'm really hoping that your team is working with Lisa's team and making sure that we are maybe using this North Omaha outreach as a pilot for creating some advocates in North Omaha from a kind of a
yes
an opportunity to
Director,
advocates in North
Director
Omaha.
Mulhoff, you are spot on. The tools are just going to be complementing each other. In that regard, timing is going to be the crucial part because we've got so many different outreach efforts going on and we don't want to fatigue the customers, but they're going to be at different segments, right? So we're going to make sure that we have a master plan for all of that so they complement each other.
But I just think that there's an appetite for outreach in North Omaha right now, that they're looking for us to reach out. They're looking for us to help them to come on board and to reestablish that trust. So thank you for this, Heather. I appreciate it, and good work.
Yeah, and I'll just comment too, we were very intentional at the beginning of the strategic initiative to kind of say what we could put into practice as we went. We most certainly would, right? And I'm, proud to say that we have partnered and included, a number of the individuals and team members from our public affairs outreach team as a part of this. And so, it's been fun to see a lot of the learnings that we've made as a whole team find itself into live practice, whether it's through our marketing or our outreach opportunities. I'm really proud of the work the outreach team has done with the North Omaha event. And I think that what we need to challenge ourselves to is taking it to that next level of engagement. And remember, that's the ongoing relationship, not necessarily the ongoing outreach, right? And there is a difference there. And so finding a way through these engagement tactics to build that relationship beyond just insights gathering and informational providing is going to be hopefully a goal of the initiative, or a realistic goal that's achieved of the initiative in the future.
Thank you. Are there any other questions right now? All right, I don't see any hands being raised. Heather, again, thank you so much for addressing us and providing this today. As Director Moody said, always a fantastic job. So with that, I think that we are finished with our agenda today, and it's not even 2:30 yet. So great job, team. So we will see everyone on Thursday at 5 p.m. at the Civic Center. Thank you.